Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hammersmith and Fulham's first virtual full council meeting. The meeting is being broadcast live on the council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Darrell Brown, the Mayor of London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. I'd like to remind all participants of a few housekeeping points. In order to make this meeting audible for our listeners, please keep your microphones muted when you are not speaking. Please wait until I call on you before speaking, and please keep your camera on throughout the meeting. I also ask that members keep their speeches brief and to the point. A timer will still be in operation, and I will indicate when you have 1 minute left and when your time is up. Amendments to special motions were circulated earlier today, and if the guillotine falls, you will take these as moved and seconded. I now move to item 1 on the agenda. Any apologies for absence?
No.
No apologies.
No apologies for absence.
Thank you. Item 2. So we've received no apologies. Roll call and declaration of interests. I will now ask our monitoring officer to do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance.
Thank you, Mayor. I will now call on all councillors in alphabetical order. When called, please say present and note any declarations of interest. If you don't have any declarations of interest, just say present. Please remember to unmute yourself before speaking. Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Councillor Alford.
Present. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Brockett-Bank Fowler.
Present.
Councillor Andrew Brown.
Present.
Councillor Darrell Brown. Councillor Caleb Landy.
Present.
Councillor Cassidy.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Connell.
Present.
Councillor Cooper.
Present.
Councillor Cowan.
Present.
Councillor Culhane.
Present.
Councillor Donovan.
Present.
Councillor Fenimore.
Present.
Councillor Harcourt.
Present. Present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Holder.
Present. I wish also to declare an interest in special motion number 2. My father is in a care home within the borough. This is not a disclosable pecuniary interest, and accordingly I intend to speak and vote on this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Holder. Councillor Hogan.
Present.
Councillor Johnson.
Present.
Councillor Jones.
Present.
Councillor Carmel.
Present.
Councillor Kwan.
Present.
Councillor Layton.
Present.
Councillor Lloyd Harris.
Present.
Councillor Loveday.
Present.
Councillor Macmillan.
Present.
Councillor Morton.
Present.
Councillor Murphy.
Present.
Councillor Perez.
Present.
Councillor Cayenne.
Present.
Councillor Quigley.
Present.
Councillor Ree.
Present.
Councillor Richardson.
Present.
Councillor Rosenberg. Councillor Rosenberg. Councillor Rowbottom.
Present.
Councillor Sanderson.
Present.
Councillor Schmidt.
Present.
Councillor Sadiq,
Present.
Councillor Smith,
Present.
Councillor Stainton, Councillor Stainton, Councillor Stanton,
Present.
Councillor Thorley,
Present.
Councillor Uberoy,
Present.
Councillor Umi,
Present.
Councillor Vaughan,
Present.
Councillor Vincent.
Present.
Thank you.
Mayor, with apologies, can I just say that I've just had a text message from Councillor Stainton, who said that her computer has gone down. She will try to get it fixed as soon as possible and may join us later.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So before we move to the minutes, I would like us to all observe a minute's silence in memory of all those who have died as a result of the COVID-19. Let us now move to the minutes. Councillor Hearn, do the Labour Group agree the minutes of the meetings held on the 25th and 26th of February 2020?
Agreed.
Thank you. Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? No. Councillor Carmel, do the Conservative Group agree the minutes of the meetings held on the 25th and 26th of February 2020?
Agreed.
Thank you. Are there any members of the Conservative Group that disagree? No. Thank you. Item 4, Mayor's announcement. It is with great sadness that I must inform the Council of the death of former Councillor Brendan Bird, former Deputy Lieutenant Colonel John Holland, and the founder and former chairman of Berkeley Homes, Tony Pidgley, and the tragic death of Alexander Kareem, a 20-year-old local resident. Brendan Bird was elected as a Labour councillor representing Sands End ward from 1994 until 2006. I invite Councillor Lisa Homan and the leader to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, everyone. What a strange world we live in. I could never have imagined myself sitting in front of a computer screen paying tribute to someone who was not only an outstanding and well-respected councillor for Sands End ward, but someone who had such a positive impact on our local area and on our borough. And to me, who was personally a very, very dear friend. I first met Brendan when I joined the Labour Party in 1988. He was the one who knocked on my door, welcomed me into the party, and cajoled me into getting involved in only the way that Brendan Bird knew how. I was most definitely a testament to that cajoling being successful, as Brendan needs to take his responsibility for the part the blame for me being part of Hammersmith and Fulham Council for so long, and I will leave others to make the judgment on whether or not that's a positive or negative legacy. In terms of Brendan's personality, his trademark was that gentle cajoling, that never give up attitude, that profound sense of fairness that he held to ensure that social justice was always done, whether that was in relation to an individual resident's case, of which there were many that he thought long and hard for and often argued with us about, including me, or something more strategic, such as a housing policy upon which he was an expert. When Brendan got the bit between his teeth on something, he never let go. I'm sure that many listening tonight who knew him from across the political divide will recognise that characteristic. Going back to those early days, what particularly stands out in my mind is how friendly and welcoming Brendan was in comparison to what was then the Fulham Labour Party, where I was viewed with considerable suspicion. Why would a young woman want to get involved? Brendan saw his way through that, and after all of this time, that's where our friendship began. Besides his love of the Labour Party in his local community, Brendan frequently rode his bike, particularly around Sands End, and I'm sure many of us have at some point worried, especially in the later days, about the wobbling down the road. He loved Fulham Football Club, he loved his table tennis, and I know that many of his friends who played table tennis were there for him until the very end, and how much he appreciated that. He also loved his blues music and shared with my late husband a passion for Bob Dylan. And I will be forever grateful for his visits around to Rob to cheer him up during his illness, and the support that both he and his wife Viv gave to me during what was a difficult time. Brendan leaves behind many friends and a wonderful family. My thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the whole council, and our best wishes go in particular to his wife Viv, daughter Jessica, grandsons Finn and Dexter, and his twin brother Tony. For Brendan's family, many friends and colleagues across the political divide who are online this evening, sadly we have not been able to gather in the council chamber to pay tribute, but I hope my words go some way to do just a little bit of justice to someone who was an extraordinary man who I know who will be missed by so many, and I will miss him enormously. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Would Councillor Cowan like to say a few words?
Yes, and thank you very much, Madam. Brendan Bird was not only a good friend, he was a stalwart for Fulham throughout the whole career that he worked. It is particularly sad that Brendan was one of the first people to pass away in the early stages of the COVID-19 crisis. Not that that was related, but it did mean that where we would normally have time to gather and grieve and tell stories, but those stories have in many cases gone untold. The Brendan I met in the mid-1990s was passionate for Labour to win, passionate for us to win in '97, which we did, and passionate for us to control the council, which we did up until 2006. And I don't think there was anyone sadder than Brendan, not just to have lost his seat, but more so for his concern for what would happen for people who saw that he represented. As the newly elected leader of the opposition in 2006, Brendan continued to advise me, much as he had when I was cabinet member for housing, something that he was a profound expert in. Brendan brought me into the campaign on the Castle Youth Club and worked to stop that being sold off. He was passionate about the Peterborough Primary School sell-off and worked with us on that. He was a key part of the team that worked on the closure of Hurlingham Chelsea Secondary School and provided that. And Brendan Bird loved the Sands End Community Centre, where he played table tennis and was part of that community and helped organise the campaign and got me involved, bringing in some 7,000 people. even though Brendan Bird wasn't elected into office, he still fought for the people and for his value system. He had friends across the political divide, and I was honoured that he agreed to run as our candidate in the 2008 by-election and again in 2010 and 2014. When people think about Brendan Bird, what they will do is remember a very good man, a kind man, a man who fought on the side of the Naples, and a man that I think the legacy of which will long live, not just in what we continue to do as an administration, but also in many of the achievements that he helped bring about, not least. And I think in a few days' time, when we begin to open the new Sands End Arts Community Centre, maybe all of us will take a moment to think about Brendan Bird's role in fighting for those values that brought that idea about into bricks and mortar. Brendan Bird.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Oh, Councillor Carmel, would you like to speak? Thank you.
I believe Councillor Lloyd Harris wishes to speak first.
Right. Councillor Lloyd Harris, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was stunned actually when Dame Sally Powell rang and to tell me that Brendan had died, as I'd only chatted to him at Sainsbury's not long beforehand. Brendan and I constantly ran into each other, as he probably did with most people in Sainsbury's, or occasionally I'd sort of mistake Tony for him, which is a little embarrassing. But we always had a bit of a chuckle about it, and it was quite reassuring to know that I was not the only one that mixed them up. Brendan was big in stature. He was big in his passion for Sands End and his residents. They always seemed to be his residents, no one else's. They were Brendan's, and they were devoted to him. He was an immensely popular councillor because he got things done. We had our moments, but nothing that would last too long. Life, as they say, is far too short. Our condolences and sympathies go to Viv and Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, could you fix your camera, please? We couldn't see you. Thank you. Now, Councillor Carmel, do you wish to speak?
I do, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Brendan was pretty much a one-off when it came to councillors. My wife, who was a Sands End councillor for 12 years, told me this afternoon that she was amazed that at every count she attended where Brendan was the Labour candidate, Brenda sought her out, gave her a hug and wished her good luck. To wish your opposing candidate, who ultimately defeated him and lost him his seat, representing the people he loved down in Sands End, shows just what a warm-hearted individual that he was. He was always willing to chat in a friendly manner with members of the opposition at times when we were at political loggerheads. He believed firmly in the principle that what happened in the council chamber happened in the council chamber, but when we went over to the salutation, that was another matter altogether, and he was quite happy to talk in a friendly and personable manner and be a friend even to members of the opposition. On a personal note, if I may have your indulgence, Matt, I remember having begged, borrowed and stole a ticket to the reception that was held at Fulham Town Hall for Chelsea winning the FA Cup in 1997, and having called in many favours to get the Labour administration to give me a ticket as a defeated Conservative candidate. He saw just how much pleasure I got from holding the FA Cup close to my heart, and he said, "Do that again, Alex. I've got my video camera," and it was one of those big old clunky video cameras. I'll video that for you and give you a copy of the tape so you can always remember. Brendan was a warm-hearted, passionate believer and defender of Sands End. Those of us who have been on the council for a while will remember that infamous speech that he gave in the council chamber, trying to defend Sands End from, as he put it, the wave of concrete sweeping over it. He didn't mind upsetting his own party if he believed it was for the benefit of his residents of Sands End. He is an icon and somebody who we should all look up to and remember fondly. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Now, Colonel John Holland, CBE, was appointed by the Lord Lieutenant as a representative for Hammersmith and Fulham from 1998 until 2009. I invite the leader to say a few words. Thank you. Councillor Carney, you might be on mute.
That is certainly the term of the age, isn't it? You're on mute. I do want to pay tribute to John Holland. I met him on a number of occasions, mostly during the Remembrance Day periods. He was an extremely courteous and professional man and carried out his duties with huge levels of diligence and was widely respected by all. John Holland served as representative, as you say, Madam, between 1998 and 2009 and worked in the city for much of his career. Sadly, shortly after he retired, he fell ill with Alzheimer's and recently passed away. So our thoughts go out to Kirsten, his wife, and to all his family and loved ones, and we thank him to his public service for the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers?
Councillor Carmel.
Councillor Carmel, do you wish to speak? Councillor Carmel, you were on mute.
Thank you, Mayor. I had the honour of being mayor in the final year of Colonel Holland's lieutenancy. He was at that time the senior deputy Lord Lieutenant in the whole of London, and as mayor, you will know you spend a considerable amount of time with your DL, and him being the senior DL in London and me being a brand new mayor, I am eternally grateful for the kind words of advice, as opposed to instructions, that he gave me in my first few months of mayoralty. His kindness and his humanity at every event that we attended together shone through, and I learnt a tremendous amount for him. He showed me how that however important an event you are at, that it was always important to spend time with, if you excuse the phrase, and I don't mean it in any demeaning matter, with the unimportant people, and to spend time with them, because the honour of meeting a deputy lieutenant or a mayor would be something that they would remember for the rest of their lives. And it was a lesson that I took on very, very early on in my mayoralty. And I am immensely sad that he has passed over. I remember being mayor for his final meeting as deputy lieutenant representative for Hammersmith and Fulham. And I thought, you know, he's getting on a bit now. And I thought, as you know, Mayor, we have the mayor's car to bring us to the chamber and to bring us back. And I thought that as a mark of respect, that I would take the tube up to the town hall. And I instructed our late mayor's assistant, Keith, to take the mayor's car to bring Colonel Holland up to the town hall and to take him home again down to, I think it's somewhere down in Richmond. But that was the level of respect that I held him in, and I am deeply saddened, as is the opposition, as to his passing. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Pidgley, founder and former chairman of Berkeley Homes, I invite the leader to say a few words. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was a profound shock when Steve Curran, the leader of Hounslow, texted me to say Tony Pidgley had suddenly died. I think that shock was so amplified because whenever I saw him, he was in fighting fit form. Indeed, the very last meeting I had before we went into lockdown on the 13th of March was with Tony Pidgley. We attended the opening of the affordable housing scheme, Shepherd's Bush housing, in the Chelsea Creek development, a scheme that I negotiated with Tony. Fairly hard ball negotiation, but afterwards you could laugh and shake hands and we both could stick to the deal. Tony was a extremely colourful character. He called me actually in the middle of a pandemic to say that he'd been very moved to hear of doctors working in the NHS and was therefore out of his own pocket funding a hot kitchen to feed people in the lunch hours and in Hammersmith Hospital, and he just wanted to let me know it was in my borough. He did amazing work with the Berkeley Homes Youth Foundation, and I went to a number of those celebrations. I never dined with him or had the opportunity of enjoying social occasions because we clearly don't take hospitality, but the stories he would tell about the people who we wiped behind and the consequences for some of the deals were some of the most colourful and amusing I've ever heard. Indeed, the story of how he resisted aggressive corporate takeover from Guy Hands, the financier, is one of the most fascinating stories I think I've ever heard. So Tony Pidgley invested heavily in the borough, which is why it's right we pay tribute to him, starting with Imperial in the south, Fulham Reach, all the way up to Chelsea Creek and White City. Not all of those schemes we agreed with, some of them we fought very hard against, but when we got into office we negotiated and we got, actually the last deal we did was a £400 million deal which we have benefited from hugely. I'll genuinely miss Tony Pidgley. He was one of the most colourful characters. He started a tarmacking business and built it into London's biggest housing business. He was a Conservative Party donor, so we didn't get on everything, but he was someone you could look in the eye, do a deal with, have a hard negotiation, have a laugh and a joke, and carry on doing business. And that's the type of people we welcome in Hammersmith and Fulham. I really will miss him, and I know his family is deeply sad. He leaves behind 2 young daughters, as well as other members of his family and a young wife. And all I can do is know that everyone in Hammersmith and Fulham sends their very best wishes to someone who's made an impact on our borough.
Thank you. Councillor Carmel, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I did have the opportunity also to meet Tony in my capacity as mayor, and the leader made reference to the Imperial development, and I'm proud and honoured to say that there is still a plaque laid into the pavement there saying how I officially opened Imperial Park, a matter that was incidentally I was attacked for at a previous meeting, but we'll gloss over that. Tony was a fount of stories in private. I'm not sure that in today's modern social media with people secretly recording, he would have got away with some of the stories that he used to tell. But at the opening of Imperial Park, where I cut the ceremonial ribbon, such was his munificence that I felt that I had to declare it in the register of interests, even though I was mayor. He was at work where I met him sporadically, an incredibly hard taskmaster. His divisional managers at the Saints used to have to take a call from him at 6 a.m. every morning and explain exactly what they had done the day before and what they were going to do in the day ahead. But he was practically unique in the British housing market, of which he was one of the giants of being able to read the market correctly. And if only we as politicians could read the political will of the people as well as he read the housing market over 30 years, whichever one of us managed it would be in power permanently. He has changed the face of Hammersmith and Fulham through his development, through his various saints around the borough. And I, for one, miss him. I wish him farewell, and I offer my condolences to his family.
Thank you, Councillor. Alexandra Kareem was a local resident who was tragically killed in Askew Road, Shepherd's Bush, on the 8th of June. I invite the leader and Councillor Sue Fenimore to say a few words. Thank you.
I think the hardest thing about any job, a leadership role in politics, is dealing with tragedies that you have not been able to directly stop. And I would say that was made all the more bitter by the fact that I knew Alex Kareem. He was a wonderful young man who had his whole life in front of him, starting to go to Nottingham this September, where he would study at university, and looking forward to what type of person he might become. And that was ended suddenly by what the police described as a mistaken identity shooting on the Askew Road. A white Range Rover driven down the Askew Road, later burned out in Ealing, and the police are still hunting the assailants. Alex had gone round his friends that evening to play computer games, one of his lifelong friends, and one of them in the room had suggested they go out and buy something from Sainsbury's, much as people do. And it was that moment, that trip, that brought about the end of Alex's life. I can't tell you how upset I am about it. It's genuinely heartbreaking that any death should happen of any young person. Alex was not involved in any crime. He was not in any gangs. He was a normal citizen going to a shop. So I reaffirm, in the name of Alex Kareem, that we will do everything we can to keep our young people safe. The gangs unit, which is quickly being recruited, in many ways, I think, we double down on that to make sure that no other child is killed in this way. There is something happened to our society in the recent decade where this is all too often the norm in the major cities and conurbations, and it cannot be allowed to happen. So when we reflect on Alex Kareem and we think about a fitting tribute to this young man whose life was so wrongly taken, I think we should reaffirm our commitment to all our young people to keep them safe and to give the best possible chance at life that there is, and to say with one voice that there is no place for gangs, there are no place for criminals, and there is no place for people who carry guns and knives and think it is acceptable parts of business to take people out in this disgusting and cowardly way. Kathy Kareem and Victoria Kareem, his sister and mother respectively, are understandably devastated. I know everyone in this council will send their absolute love to that family as they struggle to come to terms with the end of the family member's future life. I visited Margaret Dean Cemetery with Kathy Kareem on Thursday last week, and I can tell you it was fairly harrowing when we looked down at the ground for a moment and realised that's where Alex would be placed, as we looked at different spots to maybe lay his body. These instances cannot go on, and so we remember Alex with determination and love, and that's how I think, and I will bring forward a plan to give him a fitting tribute to allow all of us to think about him as the years roll on into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fenimore, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I echo everything that Steve has said, and along with Councillor Connell and Councillor Layton, we got to know Alex quite well because his sister was the candidate in the 2014 council elections alongside Councillor Connell and myself. He was a 14-year-old boy who regularly came along to support his sister, and support he did. He was there on often at the weekends or whenever he could to make sure that he was doing everything that he could to see his sister achieve something that she was really absolutely passionate about. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But what you got a flavour of was a young man, age 14. I don't know many young 14-year-olds who would make such commitments coming out on those cold winter nights when we were all campaigning. But there he was a delightful young man, he was kind, and he clearly adored his family and they adored him. It's absolutely shocking and tragic, and the whole Labour group is pretty much devastated to hear the circumstances of his death, and I cannot echo Councillor Cowan's points more than he's already said. This is deeply, deeply shocking, deeply, deeply sad. And our thoughts and condolences and love goes to his family.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carmel, do you wish to speak?
I believe Councillor Brown wishes to speak.
Sorry, Councillor Brown in that case. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and can I start by echoing and thanking the very eloquent and heartfelt words of both the Leader of the Council and the Deputy Leader of the Council. I didn't have the privilege of knowing Alex Kareem, but on behalf of the opposition, I would like to extend our heartfelt condolences to his family, his friends, and also to the Labour group, who he obviously had touched so strongly. There have been far too many, tragic losses of life in our borough over the last few months with COVID-19, but for a longer period than that, our borough and our city have suffered from a epidemic of knife crime, gun crime, gang-related crime, and as a father, it fills me with horror, especially when any young person gets caught up in that violence. But when an innocent young man or an innocent young lady gets caught up through no fault of their own, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's truly unimaginable. And I completely echo the Leader of the Council's comments and stand with him on behalf of the opposition in support of all the actions against organised crime and drugs that unfortunately fund and contribute to this violence. I very much welcome the recent major breakthrough that the Met Police, as well as other police forces across the country, had by cracking the secret communications of some of these gangs and arresting a large number, including in our borough. But we must do more, and we must also do more to address the supply side of some of these and the demand side of some of these criminal issues. That the fact that drug use and illegal drug use has become far too acceptable in modern society is something that should be shameful for us as a country and us as a borough. So when we see these tragic cases of young people murdered before they're even able to contribute what they were going to do in a long life that they had ahead of them, I think we all need to apply more pressure to those who use drugs, as well as even greater pressure on those who supply them, to make sure that more of these tragic murders don't carry on in the future. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I would like us all now to observe a minute's silence in their memory. Thank you. Thank you. Minute is up. Now, item 5, public questions. No public questions were submitted, so I will move to the next item. Item 6, committee reports. Item 6.1, council appointments to local government organisations and outside bodies. An amendment has been circulated for this item. I call upon the leader, Councillor Cowan, to move the report and recommendations as amended.
Formally moved.
Thank you. I have not been notified of any speakers on this item. Councillor Hearn, did the Labour Group agree the report and this with the recommendations?
Agreed.
Pardon?
Agreed.
Thank you. Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? Councillor Carmel, do the Conservative Group agree with the report and its recommendations?
We agree with the report and recommendations as amended.
Thank you. And are there any members of the Conservative Group that disagree? The recommendations are carried. Item 6.2, review of the Constitution. I call upon the leader, Councillor Cowan, to move the report and recommendations.
Formally moved.
We have received an amendment to the recommendations tabled by Councillor Carmel and Stanton. I call upon Councillor Carmel to move the amendment.
Formally moved.
And Councillor Hearn, does the Labour Group agree the amendment?
It is seconded.
It's a report.
Oh, right, sorry. Yes, we agree.
Thank you. Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? No. Councillor Carmel, does the Conservative Group agree with the amendment?
The Conservative Group thoroughly agrees with my amendment.
Thank you. Are there any members of the Conservative Group that disagree? So the amendment is agreed. Councillor Hearn, did the Labour Group agree the report and its recommendations are amended?
Agreed.
Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? Councillor Carmel, do the Conservative Group agree the report and its recommendations are amended?
Of course they agree.
Are there any members of the Conservative Group that disagree? I take the recommendations as amended are carried. Item 6.3, dispensation of absence for all councillors. Councillors, I call upon the leader, Councillor Cowan, to move the report and recommendations.
Formally moved.
And Councillor Hearn, do the Labour Group agree the report and recommendations?
Agreed.
Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? Councillor Carmel, do the Conservative Group agree the report and its recommendations?
Agreed.
Are there any members of the Conservative Group that disagree? No. So the recommendations are carried. Item 7, special motions. Item 7.1, special motion 1, the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. I call on Councillor Cowan and Fenimore to move and second.
Formally moved.
Formally seconded.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Cowan, followed by Councillor Fenimore, to speak for the administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We meet in unprecedented times, not just for our borough or our country, but indeed for the whole world, as a pandemic has swept through societies, killing many and leaving others ill and without care. Therefore, it is only right that we take a moment not just to remember those people who have been lost in the borough, but across the whole of the world. I've often said that this borough was amongst the first to move on to an emergency footing. It seems pretty evident that I think we were the first borough to move on to an emergency footing. And so what I will do is to set out what happened then, where we are now, and going forward, what we can look at on the horizon. Back in the end of February, in early March, many countries were moving into an emergency footing to deal with the pandemic, closing borders, shutting down societies, and taking emergency measures. And I would say it was fair to say that many of my friends, ranging from places across Europe, but also in places like Los Angeles and New York, were somewhat perplexed that there did not seem to be the same measures happening in the United Kingdom. I instructed Kim Smith and her colleagues to begin to move us onto an emergency footing, and we did that formally on the 13th of March. And it is because of that preparation in those early days that I believe that we've been able to manage this pandemic, protecting as many people as we possibly could. There were 8,000 people, we later found out, in need of shielding. There were other vulnerable residents, and there were many different safeguards that needed to be implemented. Sue Fenimore quickly led the team that put together Hammersmith and Fulham Community Aid Network, coordinating the mutual aid networks before the government even began to talk to us about doing such things. There was a huge mobilisation, equivalent to a wartime footing, that saw people from all quarters. I therefore want to pay tribute to all those in the third sector, all those in the faith sectors, and all the residents that put themselves second and did their bit for their friends and neighbours across the borough. Without them, I do not believe we would successfully manage to keep so many people safe. But still, as that third week in March rolled forward, there was increasing alarm, and that led to much concern. On the 22nd of March, a letter was given to the Prime Minister, largely written by me, but with some editing by the Conservative groups and Liberal Democrat groups on London councils, on behalf of all London councils, demanding an immediate lockdown within hours. And that happened the next day on the 23rd of March. There was a number of conversations then in conference calls with Robert Jenrick, who offered us much assistance. And I would like to say thank you to Greg Hans, who I reached out to and who responded and offered me good advice and support when we made some of the toughest decisions as we were struggling to work out how we could cut through the obvious denial and understandable denial people were in as they were coming to terms with the fact that the lives they once had in pubs and bars, at work, on tubes, in parks, was going to end suddenly as we needed to contain the worst pandemic in modern history. So thank you to everybody who took part in doing all that. Many of the businesses and entrepreneurs around the borough were also particularly helpful. Young entrepreneurs who assisted with new ideas, Olympia, who opened up their buildings for us to run services from, including the food bank, and indeed Firefly, who offered help to train and teach children from home virtually. People came from every quarter. What can we do? How can we help? And we all pulled together as a team. So as we look at where we've got to, then I think we should be very proud of everybody in this borough who made this safer for all. I am particularly proud of Kim Smith and the senior leadership team, as I worked closely with them throughout. I often likened it to spinning plates, but we didn't quite know what sticks we were trying to erect and where the plates were when we were trying to develop a whole new sections of the council which had never been developed before. People often say turning a council round is a bit like turning an oil tanker. It takes a long time. We spun on a coin to deliver services that people had never had before. So all shielded residents have visors. We've advised people to wear masks way before anybody else did. We advised people to stay home, stay safe, way before anybody else did. And we've been in the vanguard of leading the charge on this particular issue. Ben Coleman,
Councillor, you've got 1 minute left,
has done an amazing job, and I'm particularly grateful for the leadership he's shown in the way he intervened with care homes, making sure that all our care home residents were tested, were given PPE, and are given other protections at a time when it simply wasn't on the national agenda. There will be much to be said about as we go forward on this pandemic, but my greatest thanks is to all the residents and the tiny unheard kindnesses that happened all around. The NHS was in something that we will always be proud of. We have a close relationship with the NHS in this borough for many different reasons. But it wasn't just the NHS in the vanguard, it was the care home workers and the key workers. So all those people, and we can all think of dozens of them and their faces come to mind, all those people I think should be forever celebrated. And as we look forward to a potential of a second wave, and we consider the economic consequences and the danger to our country, I think we must resolve to get the best evidence, to act on it, to act expediently, and always do the right thing by all our citizens. And thank you for everybody who's done that throughout.
thank you. Councillor Fenimore, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, yes. Firstly, I'd like to also add my sincere condolences to everyone who has lost a friend or a family member to this terrible virus. Many of us will know someone who's been impacted in some way, I'm very sad to say. We are undoubtedly living in extraordinary times. Extraordinary in so many ways, but without doubt, deeply, deeply tragic. As Councillor Cameron said, moving to an emergency footing early and quickly certainly enabled the council to get ahead of the game. And by setting up the H&F can service, a whole new service, within a matter of days, meant we could readily support residents, both shielded and non-shielded, with a wide variety and range of support. Lockdown is something we've never experienced ever before, but I think that just made it that little bit easier and a little bit less frightening for people. But it certainly was a whole lot more reassuring for many residents who were really, really concerned about what it meant for them and their families. Staff set up an entirely new CRM IT system for Hammersmith and Fulham Can in less than 2 weeks, and which is extraordinary. But we managed to move quickly to a more strategic, supporting way that usually takes at least a couple of months to do by getting that CRM system in place so quickly. Staff have been incredible in reacting to the new ways of working and have proactively come forward to help. I'd like to thank them all, but I'd like to thank and add my thanks to the SLT under Kim Smith's leadership, all of whom have been working practically every hour there is in the day to do all they can to ensure that residents are safe and supported. But if I ever needed a reminder of why I've lived in this borough for my entire adult life, and by the way, I don't really need reminding because I know what an amazing and special place this is, but if I did, the reaction of residents to our calls for help were truly humbling. Nearly 3,000 people answered that call and signed up to volunteer. It's extraordinary. And our sincere thanks goes to everyone who came forward. Local mutual aid groups, or MAGs as they're known, that Councillor Karen referred to, began to spring up organically right across the borough, and another very clear indication of how much compassion there is in Hammersmith and Fulham. That hyper-local offer of support grew organically, and they became a crucial partner. Without their street-to-street, community-to-community, neighbour-to-neighbour, fast and professional approach, many people would have felt even more isolated and frightened during this time. As soon as requests for help were made, shopping for example, MAGS groups were on it like a shot, and food was delivered to those people, to their door, within a matter of a few hours. And we were also able to organise an ability for them to be able to refer back into us if they came across someone that they were particularly concerned about. A really clear message of a people-first approach in action. We've had regular meetings, as Councillor Karen has said, with our faith groups and our third sector partners, amongst others, to share information, hear concerns, find solutions, and again, these have been utterly invaluable. And there are many stories to share of how people came together, but one that I think really does warrant sharing just now is that of Henry Hall and George Devararan, two university graduates who live and went to school in this borough, who, with the support of the school that they attended, began to put the school's 3D computer into new use and made and distributed much needed PPE space visors to Hammersmith and Fulham care workers and Charing Cross Hospital, and undoubtedly prevented others from succumbing to this dreadful disease. So what next for us? But what have we learnt, more importantly? Well, there's a clear and...
Sorry, 1 minute left.
Thank you. There's certainly a clear will and desire from everyone involved, residents, groups, the council staff, the administration, to keep this goodwill and amazing outpouring of coming together going and to enable it into be a compassionate Hammersmith and Fulham way. We're working on these newfound opportunities, helping tackle some of those real issues that we come across, from loneliness and isolation, to food poverty, to mental health challenges, and many more besides. Again, demonstrating this administration's commitment to those in real need. But without the commitment of everyone adhering to the lockdown and taking the advice that was displayed far and wide across this borough, many more people could have been at further risk. There are still major risks of further outbreaks across the country, and more worryingly, a threat of a second wave. Wearing a mask is now becoming the new norm, thankfully, but please, let's go back to the beginning and remember that it's still important to wash your hands for 20 seconds, and it's been as important as it ever was at the beginning. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have been informed that Councillors Fiona Smith, Patricia Quigley, Andrew Jones, Guy Vincent and Lisa Holman would also like to speak for the administration on this special motion. Councillor Smith, would you like to proceed?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. What a strange time this has been for all of us. We've all cycled through periods of concern, fear, boredom, and also hope. But the most pertinent thing to me in all this is that the lockdown has not been the same for everyone. We've perhaps seen our friends sharing cakes and cookies online, pictures of at least, and personally I've been blessed with no commute and, crucially, a job that enables me to work as effectively from home. And whilst I've had the space within my own home to work comfortably alongside my two housemates, many people have been working in cramped conditions, perhaps whilst caring for their own children. And children's circumstances, having had to leave school and study from home, have ranged from studying in privacy, or perhaps struggling for space and resources to their detriment. My own biggest hurdle in this period perhaps has been boredom, and my employer has embraced home working before the crisis, so as a result our transition has been smooth. It's clear that that luxury has not been afforded to all. There are many jobs that rely on your presence to be viable, from bus drivers to staff on the factory floor. And many of the most crucial roles in our tackling of COVID-19 and crucial to our recovery after all this have been those placed most at risk because they cannot work from home. The differing fortunes across our borough have been compensated in part by the fantastic CAN initiative and the tireless mutual aid groups. If you're on a WhatsApp group, you'll know that requests are answered swiftly by our public-spirited residents. And the RBS scheme was, to our nation's credit, heavily oversubscribed. All this sterling effort is in stark contrast to our performance on a global scale. We've all been shocked by the numbers of cases and, sadly, the numbers of deaths. Whilst government has deliberated, Hammersmith and Fulham Council has advocated a lockdown early and have advised our residents to wear a mask when out and about. We all know that we're going to be in this for the long haul. The virus itself is not the only threat we face. As I mentioned at the start, in contrast to my reasonably comfortable lockdown, I'll be honest, other people have found themselves furloughed or on universal credit for the first time perhaps, or maybe in some cases they're unable to access any support at all, having fallen through the cracks. Stresses at home have led to an increase in domestic violence. Financial worries have impacted the mental health of many, and the cloud of uncertainty has affected our economy. This has been a tale of two lockdowns. For some, this has presented a mere inconvenience, and for others, there's been the heartbreak at the loss of loved ones, fear for the future, and anger at the government response. Government measures such as supportive furlough have been welcome. We do need a master plan and not a quick fix. We need the firm support of wearing a mask in public places. We need a robust safety net through a reformed universal credit that doesn't leave people wanting. And our NHS and care workers need the resources to ensure that they're not overwhelmed and they can tackle not just the COVID-19 admissions, but the routine cancer care, the accident and emergencies that occur, antenatal and so on, things that cannot be overlooked a moment longer. Crisis has shown up the cracks left by a decade of austerity. Our solution must be one of permanence. Our council will maintain its people-first approach as we face potentially the biggest recession in history. We're still battling the virus, but the war will last, I'm afraid, much longer. We must strive to mend society for the better, take inspiration from the good deeds of many in this crisis, and ensure that never again we see our country fare so badly on the global stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Quigley, do you wish to speak?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Patricia.
Oh, right, sorry, I'm new to this. Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I'd like to send my condolences to all those who sadly lost loved ones throughout this pandemic. I'd like to mention the new report by Inclusion London. This is called Abandoned, Forgotten and Ignored, and it explores the lived experiences of disabled people from the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The coronavirus lockdown has increased levels of anxiety, confusion, social isolation and fear for many disabled people. They have talked about losing control over their lives, being abandoned by the government, and have expressed fears of being denied life-saving treatment and being let to die if they became ill with COVID-19. Several disabled people said they have been asked to sign a do not resuscitate notice. While Inclusion London has come across local councils such as Hammersmith and Fulham who are working closely with disabled people, this does not appear to be widespread. There are disabled people who, despite being in high-risk groups, have been unable to obtain PPE and who have had their care packages cut, assessments delayed, or have lost existing social care support. In many cases, this has happened because in late March, the government introduced something called the Care Act easement. That gives councils the power to ignore the Care Act. It means that they could cut back on assessing and meeting disabled people's needs. Madam Mayor, I am glad to say that this council ignored the easement. Indeed, we swiftly reassured Hammersmith and Fulham residents that we would not be going down this path. Our social care director wrote to everyone getting a direct payment that the council remained fully committed to providing care and support during this time. Her letter also said that having listened to disabled people, we were putting in place new plans for communication, PPE, flexible support and access to care and support staff. Madam Mayor, the coronavirus pandemic has exposed and amplified many existing structural and systematic flaws within the social care system. The government provided the supermarkets with lists of those who were in the extremely vulnerable category, also known as shielding lists. The register did not include disabled people who have been using online shopping for years but were not in the shielding list. However, they were put more at risk because of the government policy to exclude them. As many have pointed out, it is the government policy that makes disabled people vulnerable. In local government, we can either go along with this or we can do what we can to stop these policies damaging our residents. I'm proud to live in a borough that is determined to be the best for disabled people in the country, and this has moved heaven and earth to protect disabled people throughout this pandemic. Madam Mayor, I hope you don't mind, but I would like to take a few moments to tell you about my own personal shielding experience. I think it will help you and others to have a better understanding of what it was like for people who had to shield. Of course, it goes without saying that each person has their own story to tell. The government announced shielding guidance on the 22nd of March. I had already started to isolate in early March. I received my NHS letter on the 15th of April, 3 weeks later, and only because I chased it. At one point in the early days, I had to wait 3 weeks for a delivery slot for food shopping. I tried every online supermarket, trying all different hours to book, even in the middle of the night, with no success. I had to rely on the Smile Brigade. I had to rely on the Smile Brigade to bring me food. I was very scared that if I relied on friends alone and they got sick, I would not have access to food. I was shielding for 18 weeks, 26 days, and finished on Sunday and went for a haircut, and I feel like a whole new woman. It was tough going at times. The Wolves and I got to know each other very well, and at least they couldn't answer back if I was having a rant. I called it my Shirley Valentine moments. I'm glad to be able to go out. I'm glad to be able to go out, though still very cautious, and wearing a mask and adhering to social distancing and washing my hands. Not sure when I'll have the confidence to go back into the shops again, but one day at a time is what I say. I miss being able to hug people, and I thank all those who supported me throughout my shielding period, and apologies I don't have time to name you all. And finally, we're all sailing in the same sea, but we are all on different boats. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jones, do you wish to speak? Councillor Jones, you may be on mute. Councillor Jones. Councillor Vincent was next. Councillor Vincent, you're on the list. Would you like to speak?
Yes, please. Can you hear me all right?
I can indeed, but I cannot see you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Firstly, apologies because This is going to be a boring speech. I want to talk about the humdrum day-to-day work of council officers. But on the other hand, please don't go back to checking your emails or painting your toenails, because this is very important. We are in the midst, as we all know, of a medical crisis, and I join my colleagues in giving condolences to those who suffered loss. But also, we are in a serious economic crisis. Councillor Jones, when he speaks, will be talking about the strategic aims of the administration, but I want to talk about what's going on behind for businesses, and an awful lot of officers have been working terribly hard to help our local businesses. Firstly, our officers work through the government's grants and discretionary grant schemes. These are good schemes. I will give credit where it's due, although central government guidance meant that many businesses that should have been supported have not been. For instance, a restaurant gets a grant and a business rates holiday, but unfortunately the local supply chain business behind it does not get any of these benefits because they do not supply to the public. And I want to acknowledge the great work done by our business rates team, led by Jamie Mullins. They all worked many long days and weekends to get cash to our local firms. Separately, there's been the H&F Business Network. This is a group of local business leaders who come from Parsons Green in the south of the borough all the way up to Shepherd's Bush and north of the borough. They sit as a group with the Hammersmith bid, the Fulham bid, with Westfield and with other MALs. We meet weekly recently to inform and work with the council officers, in particular working on ways to help companies to survive and to restart. And they've been involved, these business leaders have been involved in several important local initiatives with the council. The first one I would mention is that you will have seen the banners for the Shop Local, Shop Safe campaign. This aims to keep local money in the borough, being spent in shops, on services and on our local arts community. Hospitality has been very hard hit. The borough has nearly 600 licensed premises of every sort. To help them, we are running the Your Space is Our Space project, providing a one-stop shop for those restaurants and cafes that need outdoor space to keep their enterprise viable. Another service is called Patch. This is a service to companies that matches local professionals to local companies that need high quality and free advice and support. Remarkably, this has all been achieved by a small group behind the business support desk, led by Karen Gailey and Nikki Burgess. This is a great team of officers who work very hard and have literally saved many local firms. That is the local picture. But what help has business in Hammersmith and Fulham had from central government? The furlough scheme has helped many, but listen to the OBR and we know that there is a long way to go and that many businesses will continue to face hardship. And whatever good the government has done, it has, I'm afraid, destroyed local companies because it seems to me it is simply a headline-hungry government. Two examples. There was a ministerial announcement about the discretionary grant fund on the 2nd of May. The government got its good headlines. All the businesses that had missed out on previous grant programmes and were desperate for cash were, by this announcement, given hope of cash. But unfortunately, no guidance arrived for nearly 2 weeks. How many businesses went bust due to that 2-week delay? On the 25th of June, another self-regarding announcement was made by the Secretary of State, trumpeting changes that allow hard-pressed hospitality businesses an easier route to pavement licenses, which could be vital to their businesses. The draft guidance was issued that day, and it was sensible, practical. It would help cafes, restaurants, pubs to extend outdoor and replace lost seating. But what was not said in the ministerial announcement was that primary legislation was needed. The Business and Planning Bill was laid before Parliament immediately and went through the Commons in 1 day. But where is it now? It's listed to go to the report stage in the Lords next Monday. We're not expecting now to have the bill become law or the guidance to become law, enforceable rather, until
1 minute left.
So we've lost 5 weeks. We've wasted 5 weeks. Firms are frustrated by the refusal of government to get a good idea sorted out quickly that will help businesses. Luckily, with our Space is Your Space programme, we have found workarounds for this particular issue. But as an example of ministers making announcements but not delivering on what they promised, what they announced, for literally 5 or 6 weeks. It's nonsensical. It shows the government is slow, it shows the government is late helping businesses. Ministers seem to prioritise getting themselves a flattering headline over doing the hard work of delivering timely help for businesses. As they preen over their picture in the Daily Telegraph, people in Hammersmith and Fulham and across the country are losing their jobs and businesses are closing. We're going to have a lot more hard time coming for businesses soon, and we're all working hard in Hammersmith and Fulham to help and support our local businesses. My question is, why is the government not doing more to save jobs? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jones, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do, Madam Mayor. Thank you. And apologies, I had a technical problem before, so I couldn't unmute.
I think you've got more. It's frozen, Councillor Jones. We don't hear you. For the moment, sorry, Councillor Jones, while you rectify the problem, could we proceed? And Councillor Homan, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to take a few minutes to focus on Hammersmith and Fulham's response to rough sleeping during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since taking control of the council in 2014, tackling the number of rough sleepers in the borough and preventing people from ending up in that situation has been a top priority for this Labour administration. We established our Rough Sleeping Commission in 2018 to help with this vision, and it developed groundbreaking new policies with the goal of reducing the number of rough sleepers to zero. We were the first council to commit to doing so, and we were on track to deliver that in March this year. And then we saw the devastating impact of COVID-19. We were really quick to answer the government's call for help for everyone in, which asked all councils to find accommodation at very short notice for everyone sleeping rough during the crisis. On that weekend in March, our excellent housing team, led by Chief Housing Officer Mark Meehan, working with the support of our rough sleeping partners Glassdoor, St Mungo's, the Upper Room and the Barons Court project, we succeeded in getting every rough sleeper in Hammersmith and Fulham off the streets and into accommodation. It was a remarkable achievement. It cannot be underestimated, as many councils up and down the country struggled to do this for a number of days. As Cabinet Member for Housing, I had several residents contact me about individuals they had seen and perceived to be rough sleepers. And I really did appreciate how quickly both council officers and in particular St Mungo's responded to those cases. So a really big thank you. To date, Hammersmith and Fulham councils provided for 275 single households that were sleeping rough or at risk of sleeping rough throughout the COVID-19 public health emergency. As we move forward as part of our council recovery plan, we have already begun to ensure that each of those households have been provided with accommodation and will be given an individual move-on plan. 110 households have already moved into various types of accommodation, some into the private rented sector, some into supported housing, and some into one of our rough sleeper assessment hubs, where we can provide more support and help that they need to move on to find a longer term solution. As we know, the reason for people ending up on the streets can be very complex, and in many cases, intensive support involving a range of services will be needed. The response to COVID-19 continues to place increasing pressure on councils' budgets, and is therefore important that councils continue to make the best value of the money that we have available. At a strategic level, I'm really pleased that Hammersmith and Fulham have led the way in recommending a pan-London approach to working with landlords in the private sector, so that boroughs are consistent in any payments when finding homes for people leaving emergency COVID-19 accommodation. I'm pleased we've achieved a single London set of rates for studio and one-bedroom accommodation, which will mean we don't end up outbidding other boroughs in the private rented market. Whatever Hammersmith and Fulham pays in the private sector, every other London borough will pay the same. The government's recently announced further funding to support rough sleepers, and whilst all funding is welcome, it does not address the funding gap councils are facing in response to this COVID-19 emergency. Here in Hammersmith and Fulham, we wait to hear how much of the extra 105 million of funding we will be allocated. But what I can safely say is that any funding Hammersmith and Fulham receives to tackle rough sleeping will produce positive results and better outcomes for some of the most vulnerable members of our society. As I said earlier, the long-term solution for many will be complex and involve many different agencies, and the government needs to understand that. With our Rough Sleeping Commission, we committed to ending rough sleeping in Hammersmith and Fulham. And despite the challenges of COVID-19, we have put this in place, and we will not be knocked off, of course, and remain totally committed more than ever to ending rough sleeping in this borough as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jones, would you like to make another attempt?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and apologies. Hopefully the third attempt will be successful with a bit of a technical challenge this evening. So I wanted to start by adding my condolences to all those who've been affected. There's been an enormous impact on the lives of everyone in the borough, as we've heard this evening. But as relates to my role in the council as cabinet member for the economy, I want to speak a bit more about our response as a council to the enormous economic impact of the pandemic. And as Councillor Smith referenced, and as Councillor Vincent and others have talked about, we face a very deep recession, perhaps the deepest recession since the 18th century, and as Councillor Vincent has already outlined, there has been a profound impact on the economy and the businesses in this borough. The first thing I would like to say is to extend my thanks and my gratitude to both officers and businesses and the many people in this borough involved in economic activity of all kinds who have risen to the challenge and have sought to do two of the most important things that I would highlight in our response. Quite quickly after the lockdown started, it became very clear that what we needed to do as an immediate priority was protect jobs and protect businesses from going bankrupt. And our officer team in the town hall were working late into the night for many weeks and have been working all the hours, all the weekends as well, in trying to help, as Councillor Vincent said, protect as many businesses, enable them to survive this terrible impact. And we have been in touch with hundreds of businesses in the last few months, both in terms of delivering the government's financial aid, but also in terms of, as the leader said, thinking about the creative ways in which we as a business community and as a council can work together to enable our economy to survive and move to a recovery stage. And that's what I really want to spend my few minutes talking about a little bit more in terms of our approach to the recovery and to really maintaining Hammersmith and Fulham as a leading place to do business in Europe. As you will know, we have an industrial strategy which was going very well. In terms of our approach, which many other London boroughs were looking at in terms of its successes, and also was, I think, shining a light in the sky for others in the country to follow. This strategy was based on inclusive growth, economic growth for all. It was based on a partnership with Imperial College London in terms of focusing in part on some of the economic areas, the hot areas of the global economy that create high value jobs jobs and employment that could be extended to all of the residents of this borough. And it was also based on partnership with Imperial, partnership between the council and the many small businesses and large businesses in the borough, and partnership with other actors who really could anchor our economic success in place. Now, clearly the pandemic has presented a huge challenge to this in turn, but we have been thinking about a strategy to respond to that almost immediately from when the lockdown took place. And we are realigning our industrial strategy to think about how we can adjust it to respond to the challenge that we have. As others have mentioned, we have had 22,000 people in the borough furloughed in this phase. We may see up to 5,000 jobs in the immediacy being affected. But quite clearly the economy will shift in terms of response to the pandemic, that enormous challenge to hospitality, retail and the arts sector that's been talked about. So our industrial strategy will realign towards some of the new shifts, maybe not the new normal, but the way the economy is now moving, a move towards digital. We have great strength in life sciences in the White City Innovation District, and in terms of our approach to biotech and other high value industries, some of which have been less affected by the impact of COVID-19 than others. So Hammersmith and Fulham has an enormously resilient economy, and we are aligning our industrial strategy so that Hammersmith and Fulham can be a leader in the recovery, both in London's economy and indeed in the UK economy overall.
Sorry, Councillor, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'd like to end by once again thanking all of the many businesses that have engaged with the council. I have to say, in my role in the years I've been doing this, we have spoken, I think, to more businesses in the last 3 months than we ever have before. We've seen business networks forming in all parts of the borough in attempt both response to the pandemic and also thinking forwards about how we can have a growing economy and put people back in work and see new businesses starting up in the recovery. And I will leave it there, but I once again want to thank all of that community involvement in the business community that has enabled us to have such an effective response so far. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Loveday, I believe you wish to speak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, can I apologise? I'm having a few problems with bandwidth, and it may be that I break up a little bit during the course of the what I want to say. And various people have mentioned the unprecedented nature of this meeting, and it really is. I've been on the council best part of 25 years, and it strikes. One of the things that struck me was that during the lockdown, we had the anniversary of VE Day. And despite dropping tens of thousands of tons of bombs on this borough during the Second World War, Hitler was never able to force the Hammersmith Council and Fulham councils from meeting at their respective town halls. It's taken the coronavirus in this millennium to actually force us out of our municipal buildings. Obviously, that's nothing compared to the damage that it's caused to families who've lost loved ones, but it's a striking feature of the gravity of this. And we've got to be under no illusions. It's hit this borough hard. Look at the figures at Public Health England. The number of the infection rates in this borough they started off quite favourably compared to some of our neighbours, in particular Kensington and Chelsea. We're now up to, I think, 758 confirmed cases, which we know is the tip of the iceberg, really. That's now less favourable compared to many of our neighbouring boroughs. And there'll be a time and a place to look at, to see whether what we did during lockdown, what this borough did during lockdown, what went right and what went wrong. But it's quite right for the administration to put this motion today, even at this stage, because it's important to mark
our appreciation for the work that officers and our partners across our various partner agencies have put into fighting this curse in our over the last 3 months. We've had a lot of mention of business support, and I know the Chief Executive is able to bring her particular expertise, having done that job under our administration some time ago, or in the relatively recent past. One area that hasn't been mentioned is adult social care. I'm acutely conscious of this. I have a patient in who is being protected and has round-the-clock adult social care next door to me, in the house next door to me, everybody appreciates what officers have been doing to maintain that support during lockdown, to protect people during lockdown. Mention's been made of housing. The basics that needed to be done have been maintained, and that is obviously important. But in particular, we thoroughly endorse and agree with the decision to go into an early emergency status, and we congratulate the administration in doing that. We fully supported it, and we, in addition to that, we welcome the fact that that the constructive suggestions that we've had to make on various issues have found a voice, and we welcome the partnership not only with external agencies but also across the party political divide within the council. It would be invidious to pick out too many people within the amongst the population and the businesses, but I would make a special mention of Chelsea Football Club within my ward, which rose to the occasion and offered accommodation for NHS staff, and we're particularly pleased with that and the other things they've done to support the community during this difficult time. And finally, and we must always end on this, I want to mention the NHS and the work that the NHS has done in our borough. Within my ward, we had one of the very first testing clinics set up at the Parsons Green Clinic, showing that the community needs the Parsons Green Clinic and that it should remain open.
Sorry,
and
1 minute left.
Sorry, 1 minute, did you say? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Correct, yes, 1 minute left. Yes, correct. 1 minute.
Yes, I'll just end on thanking the NHS and in particular the work that the Parsons Green Clinic did in those early days, and we look forward to continuing that partnership with the community and to maintaining that facility in my ward. In many cases, members of the NHS paid with their lives for the dedication that they showed to the community, and we need always to recognise what that was done. So we can support this motion. We support what has been said about officers and the administration, and in particular thank those of our partners, whether individuals, businesses, or in other agencies such as the NHS, for what they have done to deal with this terrible and unprecedented threat to our public health. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lord Harris, do you wish to speak?
Yes, please. I'd like to just echo some of the comments that Councillor Loveday made and actually support them, because I think it's very important at this difficult time that we support the council with some of the very difficult decisions they've had to make. These are not normal decisions anybody would be expected to. So there is an appreciation and a recognition from the opposition of what has been put in place on everyone's behalf. I think it would be hard to find an individual in the community or any group that didn't do its bit to support those self-isolating or dealing with the loss of a loved one. The hardest part for some would have been the emotional distress, not being able to hug and say goodbye to a loved one. The nursing staff in many cases took on the traumatic role and supported those at the end of their lives. Community groups up and down the country, not up and down the country, well, I guess they did, but more locally, up and down the borough, got together and delivered food, medicines, or had a regular chat on the phone, which for a lot of people was a lifeline for those that were sort of isolating. Thousands, as Councillor Fenimore has said, volunteer for H&F Can. St F's had hundreds of people that turned up to help. Fulham Football Club, I believe, also was involved in offering buildings on their behalf to the council to help. So everybody's done their bit. Whilst this pandemic is truly an appalling situation, if there is a positive that can come from all of this, it's the reminder of community. It's not lost, it's very much alive. And it's something that I've always felt where I live, but not everybody has felt it beforehand, but I think it is very much something that is very obvious up and down the borough. And it's something that we really want to hold on to. Everyone wanted to thank the NHS staff, which we did for the 9 Thursday evenings in a row. But we must not and should not forget all of the other people that we have depended on for our day-to-day well-being. You know, the local shopkeepers who were bringing in ever larger varieties of food, the postie who never seemed to stop work, the parks teams who managed to keep a smile and good word for those novices, jogging or exercising in our allotted hour, the small businesses that managed to reinvent themselves. There are so many groups and individuals that stepped up and just got on with doing things. And these include senior council staff who had the fortune, or misfortune, depending on which way you want to look at it, running into them at a queue at Waitrose in Fulham Broadway. And when I was talking to them, this was the 3rd supermarket they've been around to in the borough, trying to find food, specific food for their vulnerable residents. And it was marvellous to see. And it was very much appreciated by the people in the queue. Homeschooling has caused more than a few tears in some families. It's difficult and time-consuming job, which invariably has to be undertaken by someone in the home. This is a job that should not be taken lightly. I think some families are having a far greater appreciation of their children's teachers. It's a demanding job, and I've yet to find any parent who's found the task completely enjoyable. So a thank you to those teachers and staff for keeping schools open to look after key workers' children. There are still many of our vulnerable shielding from the virus because they still feel at risk. And it will take some coaxing from family and friends to remind them that with social distancing, a mask and community, there is a way forward. Life will go on, but for many it'll be in a different way. I sincerely hope that we can continue with this positive sense of community and that has emerged over the last few months. As scientists have said repeatedly, we are not out of the woods yet. The pandemic is still with us. So resting on our laurels is not an option. So I am very much in support of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Cowan to sum up, please.
Well,
Madam Mayor, I wish to speak, Madam Mayor.
Sorry,
Madam Mayor.
Sorry, Councillor Brown, I didn't have you on the list. Thank you.
I wish to speak. I apologise. I thought I had been added. May I speak, Madam Mayor?
Please proceed. Thank
you. Can I start by, reiterating and echoing the comments of all the speakers so far on this unprecedented motion during an unprecedented time that I'm sure none of us ever imagined we would go through as individuals, let alone as councillors. First, can I start by specifically remembering those residents of Hammersmith and Fulham who have so sadly lost their lives during the pandemic, and sending out some serious condolences to their family and friends. But the many more people have been affected by this than those who have sadly lost their lives. Many of those people being seriously affected, spending long times in hospital, and who are still recovering from the physical and emotional impacts of the disease. Many people have already mentioned the unbelievable contribution of our NHS in our local hospitals, serving on the very front line of the fight against COVID, but also those in our GP clinics, our other primary care settings, pharmacies, the ambulance service, and all other healthcare settings. I'd also like to, I know there's a separate motion on this, but I'd also like to pay tribute to our social care workers, both looking after our residents inside the borough in their own homes, as well as in care homes, both inside and outside of the borough, as well as the voluntary carers and the family carers who have supported people both suffering from COVID-19, but also supporting those who have been shielding at home, safe from the virus, but nonetheless a very difficult and demanding experience. We also want to wish to thank the key workers in all other fields who serve our borough, whether they be the teachers supporting the children of key workers, or supporting our pupils' homeschooling, to the police officers, fire brigade, supermarket workers and other food shop workers who've kept us fed. The delivery drivers, the Amazon drivers, who I'm sure many of us took for granted prior to this pandemic, but now we rely on them so much and they deserve our thanks. But perhaps turning back to the council, our officers, our council officers and employees have done so much under the most difficult circumstances. And many of the previous speakers, especially from the administration, have touched on their relevant portfolios and the important work that they have done. But that would not have been possible if it hadn't been for the leadership of our Chief Executive, Kim Smith, and her senior leadership team, who have truly risen to the fore in this crisis. But we should also think about those civil servants, many of whom may well live in the borough, who serve in our national government and across London as well. And we also want to thank both the government, but also the administration of Hammersmith and Fulham for their efforts so far. This has been an extraordinary challenge for our country, and we know that some of the decisions taken have had to be taken very quickly. But we praise those who've had to do those under the most difficult circumstances. We also want to pay a special tribute to the armed forces who have done so much across our country, as they always do, including the building of the Nightingale hospitals so swiftly, and as well as providing other services. But I think one of the things that we often forget when we're thanking those who've done so much is also we need to thank those residents who across our borough have probably in some ways had to do one of the hardest things, which is to follow the advice and to stay at home. Because by staying at home and keeping themselves and their families safe, by preventing and reducing the spread of COVID, they are keeping others in our community and our country safer. And I think it's
Sorry,
very
Councillor,
important.
1 minute left.
It's very important that we thank those people too. But I'll conclude, Madam Mayor, by saying, sadly, I think it's clear to see that both in this country, but perhaps even more so worldwide, COVID-19 is far from defeated. We hope and pray that there won't be a second wave in the autumn or the winter. but we must do everything we can to prepare for that. But most importantly, perhaps, is the work of those researchers at places like Imperial College in our borough, but also those further afield who are doing so much in order to try and find effective vaccines and treatments to make sure that COVID can be defeated once and for all. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Cowan to sum up, please. Sorry.
Thank you very much for all of the remarks. They really have been some very strange days, and I think it is fair to say we are not out of the woods yet. In those early days, then we were essentially assembling an enterprise that most of us were trying to figure out how it would work. And I'm particularly grateful to the many people who worked with us, often till 1 or 2 in the morning, 7 days a week, in those very early days when we were trying to identify the challenges and to develop the responses. Our officers particularly showed an amazing commitment. Anybody, any fly on the wall, would have been nothing but impressed with their professionalism and dedication. And I want to put on record my profound thanks to all of them. The code we adopted back then was very clear. Let's get the best possible evidence of what we think is going to happen. Let's not wait for it to come down the line from government, and then let's act on it without fear or favour. And that, I think, remains the code of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and will be going forward. Very much in any endeavour, you need to be objective in understanding what exactly has happened. And I therefore think it is good news that today the government announced an independent public inquiry, and I look forward to the information that will come out of it. There's much to respect about the Prime Minister and a strong leader that he is, with his party so close to him, but there are questions that need to be asked about what happened in those early days. The missed COVID-19 meetings, the commitment to shaking hands, the attendance at rugby matches, and allowing the Stereophonics and the Cheltenham Festival to happen were all the wrong messages, and the wrong messages when there are already lessons from abroad. Now, I say this not for party purpose, but as we look to a second wave potentially hitting us in the autumn and in the spring, and we look at an economic recession that could last until 2023 and will be the biggest in 1720, we have to look at the objective information, and we have to feed back to those in charge of making the decisions the learning points to make sure that as we go forward, we have the lowest death rate in Europe, not the highest as Britain currently has. So there are many lessons that need to be learnt. They need to be learnt now, and they need to be enacted, and things need to be corrected. This is a great country, and people do obey the law, and they look to all of us in positions of authority for leadership. And that's what we commit to continuing to provide in Hammersmith and Fulham, not just for the residents of our borough, but by trying to influence other councils and other governmental bodies, and indeed the government itself, as we try and work out what the best thing to do is, and put the residents first and the businesses first of everyone in our country in making the right decisions to get through this pandemic with as many people safe and as many businesses saved as possible. I reiterate, that is the commitment coming from this borough tonight. And as we go forward with resolve, we will determinedly make the right decisions to live up to those goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I now put the motion to the vote. Councillor Ahern, how do the Labour Group wish to vote on the motion?
For.
Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? Councillor Carmel, how do the Conservative Group wish to vote on the motion?
For.
And are there any members of the Conservative Group that disagree? So I declare the motion carried. Item 7.2, Special Motion 2, Protecting Our Care Homes. A corrected version of the special motion was circulated earlier today. I call on Councillors Coleman and Quigley to move and second the corrected motion. Councillor Coleman?
Yep, thank you, Madam Mayor. Well,
No, are you going to move it?
I am going to move it. Yep. Sorry, I should have done. I'm forgetting procedure. I'm going to move it.
That's right. And Councillor Quigley?
Formally seconded.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Coleman, followed by Councillor Quigley, to speak for the administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Well, we all know that the lockdown may have been loosened, but the coronavirus is still going to be with us for the foreseeable future. And we've already talked about the possibility of an inquiry. If we're going to fight the coronavirus effectively in the future, we have to learn from what's happened so far. So what this motion really about is learning, and particularly it's about learning what's happened when it comes to saving lives in care homes, what's worked and what's failed. And I know that we are all horrified by the number of deaths from COVID-19, and I'm glad we've expressed our sorrow about this. We've lost 55,000 people across our country, and they've died. It's truly shocking. And it's also very shocking that nearly 40% of those have been care home residents across the UK. In our own borough, it's very, very sad that 308 residents have lost their lives. And of these, 16%, a much lower percentage than the rest of the country, but still 50 people who are no longer with us, were care home residents. And our hearts go out to all their families and their loved ones. And you know, Madam Mayor, I was sad last week to see the Prime Minister blaming the people who run care homes. His actual words were, too many care homes didn't really follow the procedures in the way that they could have. But you know, Madam Mayor, I've been very closely involved with this. I'm the Cabinet Member for Health and Social Care, and I've worked with the most incredible officers and NHS people locally. And it wasn't a failure by our care homes to follow the government's procedures that was the cause of so many deaths. Sadly, I fear it was because the government's own procedures have too often been at fault. And what we've had to do, and this is part of the learning I hope we can talk about, throughout the past few months in Hammersmith and Fulham, we've consistently had to take our own action to save lives in the face of government failure. So right at the beginning of as the pandemic took hold, we were really disturbed by the number of deaths in our care homes. We were all very shocked to understand what was happening. But what we were really shocked to learn in early April, on top of this, was that patients who lived in care homes and had been in hospital were not being tested whether they had coronavirus or not before they were being discharged from the hospital back into their homes. Now, we protested locally. We said, you've got to test them. But we were told it was national policy. It was being done to free up beds. So people all across the country were being pushed out of hospital, going back into homes, infecting other people who ended up in hospital in perhaps the same beds. Now, we know it can be hard for NHS managers to resist what come down from Whitehall. So the council took its own swift decision to cut through all this, and we closed our homes in early April to new and returning residents. And I must, Madam Mayor, pay tribute here to Lisa Redfern, our exceptional Director of Social Care, and to Dr. Nicola Lang, who's our Director of Public Health. And I'm also, I have to say, very grateful to the Leader of the Council for pressing for action and for giving his full backing to us for going alone. I think we were the only council at the time to save lives. It was very unusual what we did, but quite honestly, Madam Mayor, there was no other option that we could take to protect our residents. And then Dr. Lang got this incredible team of experts from across the social and health system with Imperial, GPs, doctors, nurses, to go into all the care homes, test for the virus and control infection. And I'm incredibly grateful, as I think we all should be, to them all for doing this. And I'm coming back to the difference perhaps between government procedure and what we did, is we tested every resident, every member of staff from the beginning, whether or not they had symptoms. Now, we tested these asymptomatic staff, as they're called, because we were worried that staff moving between homes could unwittingly spread the disease. This was beyond the government's procedure. At the time, the government was saying only symptomatic staff needed to be tested, and that was inadequate, so we did differently. And finally, on the 14th of May, after a long time, we'd been doing it for weeks, the government changed its mind, said that asymptomatic staff will be tested nationally, something that would have saved many lives if it had happened sooner. And the most extraordinary thing happened on the 15th of May, one day later. Health Secretary Matt Hancock stood up in Parliament and said that ministers had tried to throw a protective ring around care homes right from the start, he said, of the outbreak. And he said this, although he knew the government had pushed hospitals to discharge without testing. He knew the government had done nothing for months to test asymptomatic staff. He knew that it hadn't prioritised workers in care homes and in domiciliary care for PPE, which was essential. He said this, made this extraordinary statement. So, Madam Mayor, where we are today is we in Hammersmith and Fulham tested all of our care home residents and staff 4 times, symptomatic and asymptomatic. There's more testing on the way. We've provided every home with full PPE and training. We've provided that for free. Not every council has done this. It's not government procedure. To ensure compliance with testing, we've assured staff that if they have to isolate, we'll pay them up to £200 a week because sick pay is very low and many agency workers don't even get that. And not every council has done this, and it's not government procedure.
Councillor, 1 minute.
So, Madam Mayor, thank you for that. I'm in no doubt that what we've done in Hammersmith and Fulham is we've controlled the virus, we've prevented further deaths in our care homes, and I'm deeply proud of all those in the council and our local NHS who've come together in this remarkable effort. So I think as we learn and seek to learn from what's happened so we can establish what best to do next, let's be clear. In our borough, when it comes to care homes, and indeed in many other areas, local action has succeeded where the national effort has failed. And this is a blueprint for the future I think we should all reflect on, and I urge everyone to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Quigley, do you wish to speak?
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Coleman has set out the action that this council has had to take to address the government's many failings around care homes. He highlighted the difference between their words and their deeds, a difference which was sadly fatal for many. Let me remind you of another set of empty words. 3 months ago, on the 12th of March, the Prime Minister said this to the British people. I must level with you, level with the British public. More families, many more families are going to lose loved ones before their time. I'll be honest with you, the Prime Minister's words frightened me a lot, given that I had gone into isolation earlier that week to stay safe. But what frightened me more was that his words were his actions, or to be more precise, his lack of action. Because after the 12th of March, apart from advising anyone with new temperature or new cough to self-isolate at home for 7 days, the government did nothing next. Nothing to stop families losing loved ones before their time. It did not close schools. It did not ban the mass gatherings that were happening that week, including the Six Nation rugby match and the Cheltenham Festival. It did not close parks. Indeed, at the same press conference, the Prime Minister actively encouraged people to go and exercise in parks. This failure to act left me feeling very frightened, upset and alone. It took a further 2 weeks until the 23rd of March before the government was finally pushed into announcing the lockdown the country was crying out for. Had the Prime Minister done this on the 12th of March, I think that few families would have lost their loved ones. I think that fewer families would have lost their loved ones before their time. I'm only glad that in our borough, on the 13th of March, the day after the Prime Minister frightened the country but did little to protect it, the leader of the Hammersmith and Fulham declared that the council was going on to emergency footing and appointed a director of the COVID-19 response. I've never felt so much relief. Finally, someone with taking leadership of the crisis and doing something to support and help local people. As the first step, this meant closing our parks, which following the Prime Minister's statement were packed with people possibly infecting each other. We didn't then have the powers to enforce social distancing. Once these powers came in when the lockdown was announced, we reopened the parks. Meanwhile, on the 16th of March, at a meeting with company bosses to discuss manufacturing more life-saving ventilators, the Prime Minister jokingly suggested that it could be called Operation Last Gasp. How crass was that? Just as crass was the Prime Minister's comment last week that care homes have failed to follow proper COVID-19 procedures. This was a blatant attempt to shift the blame for his government's failure to put a protective ring around care homes. As an elected councillor, it is my duty to represent constituents in Hammersmith and Fulham to the best of my ability and to work with my colleagues to do everything we can to protect our residents and keep them safe. Time and time again in this crisis, this council and councils across the country have had to step in where the government have failed. We have a government in power that has consistently misunderstood this crisis, taken poor decisions and refused to take responsibility for the many things that have gone wrong as a result. Madam Mayor, words matter. They have consequences, good and bad. From the start, the British Prime Minister has relied on sound bites and slogans to take the place of substance, and many more families have lost loved ones before their time. So I hope all councillors will support this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have been informed that Councillors Sharon Holder, and Max Smith would also like to speak for the administration on this special motion. Councillor Holder, do you wish to speak?
I do, Madam Mayor. In supporting special motion number 2, let's remember that the families of our care home residents, care workers, along with this administration, recognised very early on the challenges Hammersmith and Fulham care home providers have endured during COVID-19. Some families are yet to see their loved ones, and regrettably, some never will. This council deeply regrets the death of all local Hammersmith and Fulham care home residents and care workers, and our condolences go out to the families and friends of all those who have lost a loved one. Whilst many families felt a shared responsibility in protecting our care homes, residents, along with this administration and providers, those families with residents in care homes would do anything to protect their loved ones, even if that meant not seeing them for months, which many have not yet done. The same could be said. It's a pity the same could not be said about this government. Italy imposed a lockdown from 9th of March, with Spain following on the 14th. Nevertheless, it took Boris Johnson and his government until March 23rd, by which point the UK had the 3rd highest death rates of all nations, and over 12,000 residents had died in care homes due to COVID-19. The Prime Minister himself, supported by the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, promised the public in March a testing regime that would shortly be in place to test and isolate people carrying the virus. But like many of Boris Johnson's promises, they weren't quite the case for care homes. Detailed guidance for care homes took until June to be published. However, had Hammersmith and Fulham waited for the government's testing regime, I think it's fair to say many more local care home residents and care home staff may have died. This administration, unfortunately, took decisive and swift action in April when we found hospitals discharging people back into care homes without knowing if they had COVID-19 or not. And while the UK was losing 1,500 care home residents each month to the pandemic, Hammersmith and Fulham sensibly took action to galvanise collaboration with its local NHS partners, like Imperial, the UK Dementia Research Institute, public health professionals, social workers, GPs, experts in virology and early medicines, faculty matrons, academics, infectious disease and epidemiology teams, the kind of effective action that ensured that local Hammersmith and Fulham health and social care system together protected local care homes from as many deaths as possible. Again, unlike the Prime Minister and this government, Hammersmith and Fulham are in a position to confidently say local care home residents and staff have now been tested at least 4 times. Whether the individuals show symptoms of COVID-19 or not, as regular testing is essential in protecting our care homes. I would like to place on record my thanks to everyone who contributed towards this sterling initiative, and furthermore our heroic care home staff who have shown compassion working around the clock to protect our most vulnerable and poorly residents, whether
Councillor, 1 minute left.
Whether diagnosed with or without COVID-19. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Sorry, something happening there. Thank you. Councillor Schmidt, do you wish to speak?
Microphone.
You're on mute.
Madam Mayor, can you hear me?
Certainly, please proceed. Thank you.
No, I'll allow the opposition to speak if they're going to speak on this motion.
I cannot hear you, Councillor Schmidt.
I think he said he was having an issue with his microphone and he will let the opposition speak first.
Thank you very much. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lloyd Harris, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you very much. Aside from one glaring point in this motion, there's a lot that we would support. We'd like to join in expressing the sentiments because we genuinely believe in them. It's unfortunate, and it was echoed by the speeches we've just had, which I thought were a little disappointing. I understand the sentiment, and I understand that some people are very angry. But it actually, that sort of outburst doesn't actually help us all work together to try and find a way forward for borough residents. So I'm disappointed on that because, as usual, let's have a dig at an individual. And I'm sure you're all well aware that we don't generally buy into that because it's really not helpful. Anyway, the opposition would like to share our condolences and our thoughts with family and friends of those who've lost loved ones. We do agree and would like to recognise the effectiveness of workers on the ground in controlling the infection in our care homes. We have a duty of care to workers, residents, and those who have been struck down by illness. As part of this, it's our duty to reflect and ask sometimes difficult questions about the quality of the effectiveness of our response. We should remember that the figures I'm about to give are actually people's loved ones. And Councillor Loveday mentioned one of them previously. I'm talking about the total cases in the resident population for 3 boroughs. Hammersmith and Fulham was 759 cases, Kensington, Chelsea, 558, and Westminster, 778. However, only talking about total cases masks the fact that we have the highest rate of these 3 boroughs. Ours stands, and this is rate of cases per 100,000 residents. Our rate is 409.3, KNC is 357.2, and Westminster 304.7. Also, previous councillor has mentioned about the deaths in the care homes in Hammersmith and Fulham, which is always appalling and it's always sad to see. Hammersmith and Fulham, this is from the Care Quality Commission, have come up with these figures. We've had 26 deaths, Kensington, Chelsea, 8, and Westminster, 5. All of those are regrettable, and there are clearly a lot of people distressed about the loss of their family members. At the outset of the pandemic, patients were discharged from our local hospitals to care homes. without being tested, as has been mentioned. What I would like to understand is why this was allowed to happen, and where were the voices on the ground to challenge this? They are normally there, they're usually heard, but either the voices were not loud enough or unfortunately they weren't expressed. Once we have learnt the lessons, we'll be in a better position to deal with any future spike in our care home cases. This can only be complete with our existing strengths that we already have, that we've been working very hard on. And that's to then congratulate the council, the GPs and the healthcare professionals who have all been working together, working exceedingly long hours in order to benefit the community. Also, within that, I think it's important to recognise the special relationship that we have with Imperial College, because they've been at the forefront of the pandemic. What this pandemic has shown is that we should always aspire to best practice in our care homes. But what we have found is that there is still a way to go. Not all care homes are run with the same degree of efficiency. Our monitoring, therefore, needs to be more robust. Other lessons may include sufficient stock of PPE. Care home staff are all trained and supported in their roles. Staff have extremely difficult roles to play, and it's important that we recognise this and provide them with what they actually need in order to deal with our vulnerable residents. It's a very, very difficult and emotional job that they have. I'd like to put on record our thanks to the director.
Councillor, 1 minute left.
Thank you. I'd like to put on record our thanks to the director and her team for the tireless work that they have undertaken on behalf of our borough residents. It's disappointing that the council could not all come together and support this worthy motion, but the administration has made that impossible by politicising this at this stage and naming names. As we've said previously, it's not useful, it's not beneficial. We could work together so much more in so many more areas if you would stop that. And I think that's a real pity with this motion that that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smith, would you like to?
Hi, Madam Mayor. Can you hear me now?
I can indeed.
Okay, great. I've restarted. Sorry about that. Madam Mayor, the Speaker from the opposition just said that she regrets that we had to politicise this, but unfortunately, political decisions were made and they had consequences. And the COVID-19 pandemic is one that's affected countries in every continent in the world. And we can quickly look to other countries to see the experiences they had in their care homes and compare them to the experiences we had in our care homes and quickly draw conclusions that we as a country have failed to protect the people in our care in care homes. 25,000 people were discharged into care homes without being tested for COVID-19. The latest figures show that 21,600 people have died in our care homes with, on their death certificate, COVID-19 being listed as the cause of death. This is an utter tragedy. Madam Mayor, think about it. 1 in every 20 residents in care homes across the country has died as a result of COVID-19 in the United Kingdom. If we look to Germany, that number is 1 in every 250. You are 13 times more likely to have died in the United Kingdom if you were in a care home from COVID-19 than if you were in a German care home. This is an utter tragedy. And to pretend that it's not a political issue is to duck away from what has happened. The government made decisions, it discharged people into care homes without testing them, and that has resulted in a gigantic numbers of deaths that was completely avoidable, and which, and I want to pay tribute here to Councillor Coleman and the leader for taking the action that they did, to which H&F did manage to mitigate once they realized this was happening by refusing to take new people into care homes until that testing regime was put in place. We will discuss in a further motion the need for an independent inquiry, but that will take some time. And the lessons from this, we cannot wait for an independent inquiry because, unfortunately, many scientists predict a second wave, and we cannot allow the same to happen in a second wave. We need to act much more decisively as a country to protect the residents of the care homes up and down the country. The government must not repeat the mistakes that it made that have resulted in tens of thousands of deaths. That is why it's critical that we all vote for this motion to send that message to government that they must do much, much better. They must look across Europe and across the world to see what other countries are doing that have made them be able to much, much better. Because what happened here was just not good enough. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'll just come back on that before Councillor Coleman winds up.
Perfect. Thank you. We cannot hear you, Councillor.
Someone has their microphone on and there's a plane flying over. There we are. I think the comments from the Conservative spokesperson were regrettable. This is not an attempt to politicise an issue. This is a global pandemic, a pandemic that first of all saw Italy as the worst country affected in Europe, and a pandemic that saw Italy dumping people, particularly in Lombardy, into its care homes. So the lessons were there for governments at a national level to protect people who were most vulnerable in care homes. We have 4 private care homes in Hammersmith and Fulham, and all of them are independent, and all of them are characterised by one factor. They have far less training than even nurses who were trained for 4 years, or doctors who were trained for 7 years. As soon as we found out that it was government policy to place people into care homes, we stopped it, knowing full well we could find ourselves in a controversial fight with the government, with indeed NHS management, and possibly even with local doctors who were keen to move people out of urgent care centres whilst they were preparing for what they perceived to be a pandemic they wouldn't be able to cope with. So whilst there are some understandable motivations there, there is a lack of understanding on the considerations and the evidence given. And what we're doing is sending a message together as a council that without any concern for party, we want to make a point that people in care homes deserve better. And that's what this motion does. Now, I did reach out to Greg Hands, and I'm very grateful for his support. I also wrote to the Leader of the Opposition and the Whip and never got a response when I wrote to them in early March, not an iota. So we found ourselves working, indeed, we worked with Greg, we worked with Andy Slaughter, we worked with people across the political divide on a pan-London basis, but that hasn't been working together with the opposition locally on this issue. And if you had information, then we didn't get a response. We wrote, offered help, did not get a response. And therefore, given that the opposition isn't the most famously active opposition that we've had, no one sits, we've had people sitting on packs, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't sit on any packs, arrived late to the last budget meeting. We took the view that it was just a waste of time.
Are you not now making a political statement?
The view that it was a waste of time to follow up and say to the opposition, work with us on this. So that hasn't been working together with the opposition during this time because you refused even to respond. Now, you might want to take that up with your leader and your whip, but that's exactly what happened. And what we are doing is giving you an opportunity to come together with us to make a very robust case to government that as we look forward at the second wave, then we need to do better, particularly for the most vulnerable, the shielded, the people in care homes, the people who are least voiceless. And it cannot be that you're concerned about upsetting someone else in the same political party. I'm sure that individual is perfectly cognizant of what they did well and what they didn't do well. But this is an important motion. Lots of people have died, and it's a chance for us to put down on record that this is something happening. And it'd be good to have the opposition support, something we haven't enjoyed at any point until Councillor Loveday spoke, which I'm very grateful for.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Carmel?
Yes, thank you, Matt. I will be very, very brief. Councillor Cowan claims that he has written to me seeking help. I have just gone through my inbox. I have no message whatsoever from him. and I hope that he will accept and withdraw his accusation that I would not reply to a message from him concerning the health and welfare of our residents. I have my iPad in front of me and I have no record of it having been received. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Councillor.
Point of personal explanation, Madam Mayor. I'm just looking for Colin's text, which I understand is item number, point of personal explanation. I did write to both Councillor Brown and to Councillor Carmel, was copied in, and I will do him the courtesy of forwarding the email at the earliest convenience.
Madam Mayor.
Daryl, you're on mute.
Yes, Councillor Brown, do you wish to speak?
Thank you. As I've been named, I just want to put it on record that on the 21st of March, I reached out to the leader of the council following adding on to an email thread between him and Greg Hands that I was copied into, offering any help that I could and my group could to him. I received a short response back from Councillor Cowan saying, "Thank you, Councillor Brown. Let me know if any of your councillors need any support either personally or on behalf of their constituents." That is the as far as I'm aware, the sum reply of any letter as per Councillor Carmel from the leader of the council. I think it's undignified and unnecessary to stoop to such types of political attack, especially at a time of unprecedented challenge for our borough and our country. It was very much our desire to come to this meeting with a spirit of cooperation and to try and be as apolitical as possible. And I think it's a great shame that it's descended to this, but perhaps not unsurprising, knowing this administration as we do. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Coleman to sum up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's always difficult to know where to begin when you've been told by the opposition that you've disappointed them and that you're not acting with dignity. It's difficult to know where to begin when you're thinking about how what you've been trying to do to protect residents' lives is so different from what the government that they support has been doing. And obviously, I don't want to disappoint anyone in this room, least of all members of the opposition, but I tell you who I really don't want to disappoint, and that is the people who live in our borough, our residents, the people who look after our residents in our care homes and our social workers, the people who have the right to expect that we are there protecting them, sticking up for them and doing things which, when the government is failing, and it has been failing, it's not a political point to make it, it has been failing, when the government is failing, that we call them out. Now, Councillor Lloyd Harris said, why didn't we speak up to stop the discharging? And forgive me, Councillor, I thought I must have spoken much too quickly, because we did speak up. We fought tooth and nail to get them to stop discharging people from hospital. I thought I'd made that clear. And when we couldn't get them to change because the government guidance was to push people out as far as possible, and I can give you chapter and verse, and yet I prepared chapter and verse if I'd have more time on this. Because the government guidance was such, the local people didn't feel they could go against it. So we just said, Councillor Cohen and Lisa Redfern and the others just said, right, we're closing the homes. And we did this because we had to protect our residents. And if the government is not doing the right thing, we will do it. It's as simple as that. There was no PPE prioritised for care workers. We gave full PPE to the care homes and to the domiciliary care workers, and we didn't charge the homes for it either, which other councils has done, but we thought that way they'll use it, and we trained them up. We tested everybody in the homes, asymptomatic, asymptomatic. The government did not do this. It's only just starting to do this months later. We've done repeated testing. That is only just beginning in the country. We have to look at what has happened in the country and what has happened in Hammersmith and Fulham and draw lessons from it. And that's what we've tried to do. And forgive me for saying that I think it is deplorable for the Health Secretary on the 19th of May to have claimed, after 2 months when we were doing so many things which the government was failing to do, to make the claim that the government had cast a protective ring, and I'm quoting, around all of our care homes from the beginning. It simply isn't borne out by the reality of the situation we faced here. So I say again, I would add one thing to that. When you are elected to political office, you have to take decisions. And it's on the decisions you take that your voters, your electors in the country will judge you. What we have done here is we have taken the decisions that we believe the government should have taken 2 months earlier. We hope we have saved lives. We will never know for sure. But everything we have been doing since the beginning of this is what the government is now doing. The guidance which came out last Monday on the 6th of July said that the government is now introducing regular testing of all care workers and all residents. We have been doing that since we shut the homes. The government decided it would do it on the 6th of July. Now, I've been very closely involved with this. Forgive me if you don't feel I've involved you closely enough, but really the struggle I've had, and the officers have had, and this council has had, has been to protect the residents from the dangerous and absent, in many cases, guidance that we needed to have. And if this council has been gutsy enough, and I have to say that because we're led by a gutsy guy and we take decisions which no one else will take, if we've been gutsy enough to protect our residents in that way, and if I've had the temerity to criticise the Secretary of State for simply making up facts to justify government weakness, I'm sorry. But I tell you who I'm not saying sorry to, and that's the residents for trying to protect them. And that's the people who work in the care homes, and that's the people who work in our domiciliary care who are also having problems, because I've got issues about the way that people are being discharged into home care's support at the moment, which we're trying to address. So rest assured, we are doing a huge amount behind the scenes to fight for our residents. We will continue to do that. And if occasionally the opposition is disappointed or feels that we're not being distinguished enough in the way that we go about it, well, that's just one of those things we'll have to live with. But our residents will be protected, and I hope we will save lives as a result. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor.
Yes?
Could I say a word since I've been named?
Unfortunately, we are putting the motion to the vote. Sorry, Councillor.
Well, sorry, shouldn't I be able to say something before you have a vote?
Okay.
It would be normal practice.
Okay.
Right. All I would like to say
Yes.
is, Councillor Coleman, you haven't said anything I haven't heard before. Most of it I probably agree with. But all we're saying is what you consistently do. You will very rarely, if ever, get us to support a motion, however worthy it is, when you persist in making derogatory comments about various ministers or the Conservative Party, any more than we would expect you to do the same.
Sorry, Councillor, you have made your point.
The point is that I didn't actually criticise what they're doing. I don't believe they have done the wrong thing. I think they should be congratulated, which is, if he was actually listening to what I said, that's exactly what I said. They've done.
Councillor, I have to move forward. Sorry. Thank you. I now put the motion to the vote. Councillor Hearn, how do the Labour Group wish to vote on the motion?
For.
Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? Councillor Carmel, how do the Conservative Group wish to vote on the motion?
Given Councillor Lloyd Harris's recent comments, not voting.
Not voting. Thank you. So, I declare. Are there any other members of the Conservative Group that disagree? So I declare the motion carried. Item 7.3, Special Motion 3, calls on the Government to honour its commitment and pay councils the emergency COVID-19 funding it promised. I call on Councillors Smith and Connell to move and second.
Formally moved. Formally moved, Madam Mayor.
Formally seconded, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Smith, followed by Councillor Connell, to speak for the administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the 18th of March, the Secretary of State with responsibilities for local government, Mr. Jenrick, said, "The government will provide whatever funding is needed for councils to get through this and come out the other side." It was a clear message to councils that the government would reimburse us for everything that we've lost and spent due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And on that basis, for the first weeks and months, we proceeded to make sure that we could do our best to protect our residents, as did councils up and down the country. However, it quickly emerged as the weeks went on, the government was preparing to renege on that promise. It first came when the same Secretary of State mentioned the need of councils to dip into reserves when he gave another statement on finance a few months later. Most recently, they've talked about sharing the losses caused by COVID with local government and have introduced a scheme, details of which have not been released yet, which see loss of income split between the government and local councils. Here in H&F, it looks like the hole in our finances left by the government's failure to honour its promise to meet all of our losses due to COVID-19 is about £27 million, an enormous sum. A sum, fortunately, that we can cover through our use of reserves, which we've built up for such crises, but nonetheless an enormous sum that will prevent us using our reserves for other priorities in the future. Other councils aren't as fortunate. Up and down the country, from North Devon to Luton to Manchester to Leeds to Liverpool to Birmingham to Wiltshire to Cumbria to Windsor and Maidenhead, we've heard councils say that they face bankruptcy. Many more councils, in fact, are saying the same in private. Local government finances are in a state of complete crisis. Councils are worrying about their financial resilience at exactly the time when they should be focusing on being their boldest to make sure that this country can rebound from this unprecedented crisis. Luton Council met last night, Madam Mayor, and voted through £22 million in emergency cuts, which are going to lose 365 jobs. This is exactly the opposite of what the public sector should be doing in the midst of an economic crisis, but they have no choice because the government has not honoured its promise to meet the costs of COVID-19. And we know that other councils are meeting up and down the country in the coming weeks to vote through emergency measures that will see further job losses and further restrictions in spending to contractors, resulting in other job losses in the private sector. Madam Mayor, councils are important parts of the public sector that fund economic development efforts even when times are good. It's even more critical that we help support economic development when times are bad. But it's going to be impossible for many councils to do that. Councils do important work to keep pressure off the NHS by intervening early to offer social care to our most vulnerable residents. Many councils are facing difficult choices now that will prevent them to do just that, increasing the pressure on the NHS, costing the government money in the long term. Councils work with young people to try and put them on the right path in their life and prevent them falling into crime. Councils up and down the country will have to reduce what they spend on youth services as a result of the government not fulfilling its promise to meet the costs of COVID-19, building in costs and lost opportunities for many young people up and down the country, and ultimately increasing costs on the public sector. All of this puts our wider public sector finances at risk, and it also puts the economic recovery at grave risk. But, Madam Mayor, this is probably not even the most harmful result of the government's failure to honour its promise on funding councils to react to COVID-19. My greatest fear, Madam Mayor, is as we potentially enter a second wave, many councils up and down the country won't throw themselves with the same speed at reacting to the crisis with the assurance that the government will be behind them to make sure that costs are reimbursed. Because this promise has been broken this time, I think many councils will be reluctant to spend money in the second wave, and that will put lives at risk and make the UK's already abysmal performance internationally in preventing COVID-19 deaths at risk of getting even worse if we do move into a second wave. So, Madam Mayor, I call on everyone on both sides, the administration and the opposition, to call on the government to simply honour its promises honour its promises so that we can have an economic recovery that we desperately need, and honour its promises so that councils can face a potential second wave with confidence that the government has their back, and not with fears that the government will once again break its promises. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Connell, do you wish to speak?
I would indeed. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And I'd like to start by associating myself with the words of earlier speakers and offering my condolences to all those who've lost loved ones as a result of COVID-19. And I'd also like to offer my sincere thanks and pay tribute to the incredible and vital work that our officers right across the council and our care staff have been doing to deliver essential services to the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham over the past few months. Madam Mayor, it's a shame that we're in a position at all where we are obliged to put forward this motion calling on the government to honour its commitment and to pay councils the emergency COVID-19 funding that it promised. As Councillor Schmidt has already stated, on March the 18th, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government hosted a meeting at Downing Street attended by council leaders and chief executives from 300 councils right across the country. At that meeting, the Secretary of State rightly instructed councils to act to protect local people and communities to help stop the spread of this ghastly disease, protect our NHS and help save lives. In making this instruction, which would result in councils correctly across the country, each spending millions of pounds in response, the Secretary of State said, and I quote, "The government will provide whatever funding is needed for councils to get through this and come out the other side." Now, in my mind, those words are very clear. Whatever funding is needed. And the council leaders and chief executives who left that meeting no doubt had the same impression, that the government would fully fund councils' additional expenditure and loss of income resulting from the COVID-19 crisis. Sadly, the words of the Secretary of State now ring hollow. Instead of being provided with whatever funding is needed, councils have not been provided with the money that they need to see them through COVID-19 and the profound damage that this has done to local government finances, in contrast to many other vital parts of the economy and society which the government has rightly supported, is shocking. Instead, the government has implemented an assorted collection of technical rule changes and specific grant funding that will provide some relief to council budgets, but will in no way cover the losses that councils face during the present municipal year. Madam Mayor, the failure of the government to fully fund and support local authorities' response to COVID-19 is particularly egregious on several fronts. First, we're now in the 11th year of austerity imposed on local government by Prime Ministers Cameron, May and Johnson, which has placed extreme budgetary pressure on councils, requiring them to deliver millions of pounds of savings each and every year over the last decade. This is all while facing significant demand pressures in areas such as social care and inflation in the cost of service delivery. Collectively, this has had a devastating impact on the delivery of many public services across the country. Indeed, as Councillor Schmidt noted, some councils are even facing bankruptcy as a result of this crisis, some of them Conservative. Second, local authorities discharge vital public health duties and have specific capabilities, such as contact tracing, that are of fundamental importance during a pandemic, yet the government has often failed to recognise this and work in partnership with local councils. Third, there is a serious risk of a future increase in community transmission of COVID-19, particularly as we head into autumn and winter, that councils and other public services will need to prepare for. As Councillor Smith said, now is the most important time for councils to be able to invest in and not cut public services. According to the Local Government Association, councils will be left with a £6 billion funding shortfall as a result of COVID-19. Failing to act in response to this and fully funding councils with whatever funding is needed to defeat this virus is deeply irresponsible on the part of this government. In response, Madam Mayor, tonight this administration calls on the government to honour the promise it made to councils earlier this year and to fully fund local government for the full financial cost of the COVID-19 crisis. And I hope, Madam Mayor, that the Conservative group tonight will join with us in doing so and send a message that those of us in local government stand together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have been informed that Councillor Matt Uberoy would also like to speak for the administration on this special motion. Councillor Uberoy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will try to keep my contribution brief, not least because the speeches that were just made by Councillors Smith and Connell were excellent. and I would be dismayed if any member of this council, including the opposition, opposed this motion calling for the government to honour its commitment to pay the funding it promised to councils just weeks ago. I don't believe the facts can be disputed regarding this motion. On the 18th of March, Robert Jenrick, the local government secretary, addressed more than 300 council leaders to offer reassurance that the government stands ready to do whatever is necessary to support councils in response to coronavirus. He continued by saying his absolute priority was to ensure local councils were well placed to respond to coronavirus and protect vital services, the vulnerable and local economies. Now, these weren't just throwaway comments, it was policy, government policy. The glossy press release is still actually on the government website, and no doubt the government welcomed the positive headlines reporting that finally the government had got it when it came to councils needing more money. Fast forward 3 months, however, and we should be proud of how so many local councils across the country, and particularly this council in Hammersmith and Fulham, have risen to the challenge presented by COVID and lockdown, with our people first approach, meaning we took all necessary actions and provided all necessary resources to keep residents safe and support the incredible community effort that we have rightly celebrated this evening. Now, we did this on the understanding that we, in turn, would be supported by the government, particularly at a time when our own commercial income has been decimated due to COVID and on the back of a decade of savage cuts to our funding, equivalent to around 60% in real terms. But it appears that we were naive to believe Robert Jenrick when he promised to provide whatever funding was needed to help local councils get through this crisis and come out the other side. Madam Mayor, I only wish we were through this and coming out on the other side. The funding received so far barely scratches the surface, let alone the side that lies ahead. Economic difficulties, hardship facing communities and businesses, falling incomes, likely second waves. These are all still to come. Now, as residents leave drawings and thank you notes for our bin men and clap for our carers, there has never been a time when local government and our public services have been valued more highly. But public services need to be fairly and adequately funded, which is why I urge all members to back our council, to back our residents and back this motion asking for the government to honour its commitment to provide whatever emergency funding it takes. All we are asking, after all, is for Robert Jenrick to keep his promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers?
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councillor. Councillor Brown.
May I speak, Madam Mayor?
Certainly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't want to disappoint the speakers so far on this motion, but it doesn't come as a surprise to them that I wasn't on the call to leaders that they refer to. However, I have heard from numerous leaders of Conservative-led boroughs across London and across the country who, as well as in forums and WhatsApp groups for the LGA and various other mediums, and there's been a very similar discussion and conversation over the referred to conversation between Robert Jenrick and council leaders. You know, as a group, both present and past, we always want to stand up for residents when it comes to securing our fair share of funding from governments. And in fact, when I was last at the LGA before lockdown prevented meetings there, I vociferously defended the education funding that London boroughs receive from many attacks from shire counties that sadly receive a much poorer share as was the case. But returning to the question of local government funding, yeah, we will be supporting this motion. We do think it's important that local government does get the funding that it needs for the very important expenditure on COVID-19, as well as very much the funding that was promised by Robert Jenrick. You know, I think it's important also to recognise the exceptionally generous and comprehensive economic and financial package that the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has provided for the country in incremental phases, as we saw last week in the financial statement. So I do hope that there is opportunity for a swift additional package of expenditure for local councils to enable them to carry on doing the very important work that we all know that local government does. I think local government, whatever party you come from, knows and understands the value that it provides to local services. We understand that it has been at the forefront of the necessary but difficult attempts to balance the nation's finances and reduce the deficit following 2010. But it's important that we fight for our share of government financing, and it's important that we call for this additional funding as was promised. So in conclusion, we will be supporting the administration in this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? In which case, I now call on Councillor Schmidt to sum up, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am encouraged to hear that this will be a motion supported by both sides. It seems only half an hour ago that we were told that it wasn't possible to support a motion with that named a government minister and called them to account. So I'm glad to see that position has evolved, and you can see the value in us as a council calling on the government to do what's right. And just as we should call on the government to protect those in care homes, we should call on the government to make sure that local councils are properly funded. So it's important that we're all doing this together. Quite simply put, the government made a promise, and now it's time to keep its promise. Every day that they delay is undermining the economic recovery. Every day that they delay is making it more risky that the second wave will be more harmful. We cannot wait any longer for them to come up with a rehashed finance announcement or a re-promised funding that's already been promised. We need a full and complete settlement for local government that reimburses us for all that we've lost for COVID-19 and actually goes beyond that and enables us to do bold things to help this country get back on its feet and get this economy back to where it needs to be and make sure we can get everyone back into work. That's what we should all be doing together. So I'm pleased to see that we've been joined by the opposition in calling the government to honour its promises. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I now put the motion to the vote. Councillor Ahern, how did the Labour Group wish to vote on the motion?
For.
Are there any members of the Labour Group that disagree? Councillor Carmel, how did the Conservative Group wish to vote on the motion?
For.
Are there any members of the Conservative Group that disagree? I declare the motion carried. Item 7.4, Special Motion 4, COVID-19. I call on Councillors Brown and Lloyd Harris to move and second. Councillor Brown?
Move it.
And Councillor Lloyd Harris?
Moved. So, sorry, Madam Mayor, I had problems with my mute button.
Mayor, under
yes?
standing order 14I, I give notice that we will be withdrawing this motion. We abhor the Labour Party's attempt to turn 5,500 deaths into a political attack. We are disgusted by the
Sorry, you're breaking up. I can barely hear you.
Turn our motion praising our residents and officers into an attack on our motion, and therefore it is withdrawn.
Thank you, Councillors. I couldn't catch quite what you said. You're breaking up. It's withdrawn. Thank you,
Mayor, I'll say it again. Understanding order 14I.
I've got the message. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Councillor. So is that it? Okay. So 7.5. Yes. Moving on to 7.5, Special Motion by Lord Greenhalgh of Fulham. I call on Councillors Brown and Brocklebank Fowler to move and second. Councillor Brown.
Formally moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Brocklebank Fowler. In which case, who will second it? Would anyone wish? Does anyone
Happy
want
to second it.
Formally
Councillor Lloyd
seconded.
Harris will second it.
Formally
Thank you very much.
seconded.
I call on Councillor Brown.
Can you, sorry, Madam Mayor, could you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
yes, you're there. Hello.
Yeah, formally seconded.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I call on Councillor Brown, followed by Councillor Brocklebank Fowler to speak for the opposition. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Obviously, the main thrust and discussion and focus of tonight's meeting, quite rightly, has to be on COVID and our country and our borough's response to it, as well as the tragic loss of life and harm to our economy and all the things that COVID has done to the detriment of our country. But we felt as an opposition that as a counterpoint to that gloomy side of current life, one bright spot in our borough over the last few months has been the elevation of the former leader of the council, Stephen Greenhalgh, to the House of Lords. I didn't have the privilege of serving as a councillor under Stephen. In fact, it was his his change of role from a councillor in Hammersmith and Fulham to deputy mayor for policing in under Boris Johnson's London mayoralty that enabled me to become a councillor in the subsequent by-election. But I've known Stephen for many years, as long as I've been involved in local politics, and he's a force of nature and someone that I look up to and admire tremendously for what he has done, not only for the Conservatives in Hammersmith and Fulham, but for the borough as a whole, as leader of the council. Not only that, but his very important role as deputy mayor for policing, which saw him and Boris keep crime at record low and maintain budgets for the police at a time of cuts from national governments through their careful and intelligent management of the budget. Stephen is someone personally who's been incredibly supportive to me as leader of the opposition, and he's someone that has always shown a huge amount of loyalty to our group, but also to the residents of our borough, as perhaps exemplified by his continued role with the school in Hurlingham and Chelsea, which he has been for a long-standing governor of. Perhaps bringing this back to the issue of COVID, one of the things that was for me extremely sad about the announcement of Stephen's ennoblement was very shortly afterwards. His mother sadly passed away from COVID-19, which I know was a very huge loss for Stephen and his family. So at a time of great pride in which he has been elevated to the House of Lords, and as well as been made a member of the government as Minister of State in the Department for Local Government and the Home Office, he also suffered this personal tragedy along with many other residents of our borough. So for that reason and to recognise his achievements and his success, we wanted to put forward this motion to recognise and honour him and thank him for his outstanding contribution to our borough and to wish him well for his future endeavours in government, and we are sure he will apply the same rigour and attention to detail, and be a huge influence in those departments with which he plays a part. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, sir. Yes, Councillor.
Councillor Holman's just told me she'd like to move her amendment now, please.
Certainly. Give me one moment, please. Councillor Holman. Yes, please speak, Councillor Holman.
Formally move, Madam Mayor. Do you want it seconded?
Madam Mayor, if it's helpful, the opposition accept the amendment.
Accept the amendment. Thank you.
Hold on. Can I just raise a point of order, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I haven't seen the amendment. How was it circulated?
Sorry, Councillor, it was emailed today.
Well, I haven't had it.
I'm sorry.
I've got a problem with forwarding my LBHF emails, so I haven't seen it. It's the first I've heard of it now.
We'll have it resent to you, but yeah, that's the best we can do in this hour. Sorry.
On behalf of the mayoralty, can I apologise to Councillor Loveday? I should have realised, having told me he had a problem with the circulation of amendments, I should have forwarded it to him. But I can assure him, as the Chief Whip, we have no problem with the amendment.
That's great.
I very much look forward to you being Chief Whip, but I still take that reassurance. I'm sure if the amendment's good enough for Councillor Carmel, it's good enough for me.
Thank you.
Opposition, Chief Whip.
Is the amendment agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. That's great. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
The amendment, and now put the amendment to the vote. Councillor Hearn, how do the Labour Group wish to vote on the amended motion? Councillor Hearn?
Four. Can you hear me? Four,
thank you. And Councillor Carmel. Oh, sorry.
I've already told you, Mayor.
And Councillor Cohen? How does the Labour wish to vote? Sounding, I'm lost here. Councillor Carmel, how does the Conservative group wish to vote on the amended motion? Sorry. It's agreed.
I refer the Honourable Mayor to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Oh, yes. I'm just following protocol here. I declare the amended motion carried. That's brilliant. Thank you. Information reports to note.
Well, no. With respect, Mayor, we have now amended the substantive motion. We now have to vote on the motion as amended.
Sorry, give me one moment, please. It's fine. Sorry, Councillor Carmel, could you repeat that?
Am I allowed to speak? I was seconding the motion.
Yes, you can, certainly. Yes, you've got another minute, literally.
Why 1 minute?
Because at 9:30 the guillotine drops. Sorry. Everyone has been informed beforehand. Do you wish to speak?
It's 9:27 at the moment.
Is there? You've got about 1 minute. Okay. So would Councillor wish to speak?
Well, right. Okay. Well, I'd like to say that I absolutely support this with pleasure. The amount of work that Councillor Stephen Greenhalgh he did before he became Lord Greenhalgh of Fulham is amazing. He stuck to his promises as a politician. He reduced council tax, he made the borough cleaner and greener, and he strengthened public safety by tackling crime and disorder, which was rife. But he also wanted to thank the leader of the council and the leader of the administration and Councillor Johnny Alford for their help in arranging for the burial of his mother under the tree in Margravine Cemetery, the tree which faces Charing Cross, where her husband and Stephen's father was a consultant for over 40 years. He has been such an asset to Fulham and Hammersmith and has worked incredibly hard. And I think perhaps the freedom of the city of our borough should be awarded to him, following on from that of Michael Cartwright, who was so rightly honoured for his role in local government as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Homan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wasn't sure whether I was going to be called to speak on this or not.
Well, I thought I had more time.
What about Councillor Homan? Yes.
I will be brief and just explain why we did move an amendment, because whilst the administration doesn't want to undermine Stephen Greenhalgh's appointment to the House of Lords at all, and indeed we all do wish him the very, very best in his new role, and we do feel for him with his loss of family during the COVID situation, and I know that we did reach out to him at the time, so we do very much welcome this. However, we did want to remove some of the wording from the original motion, because we do feel that there are some residents in Hammersmith and Fulham who would have found it difficult to understand how this Labour administration, who are still trying to undo some of the things that we're...
Look, I apologise, Councillor Homan, but I wasn't allowed to do my speech. I thought I was...
Councillor Councillor Homan's actually summing up. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. So we are still trying to undo some of his legacy as
opposition motion.
Councillor Homan.
Should I continue or otherwise?
Mayor, if I could be of some assistance, Standing Order 25 has now applied.
Absolutely. So, Councillor Homan, could you very quickly sum up, literally 2 seconds? Thank you.
Well, I think I've made most of my statement, but we in the administration just felt that there are some residents that would not understand some of the sentiments in the motion, particularly the residents of Gibbs Green and West Kensington, and a number of residents that know that they weren't listened to during that time. So I won't say...
Standing Order 25.
Okay, that's my summing up. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's my summing up. Thank you.
Thank you. I now put the amended motion to the vote. Councillor Ahern, how did the Labour group wish to vote on the amended motion?
4.
And Councillor Carmel, how did the Conservative group wish to vote on the amended motion?
4, but you forgot to ask whether any members of the Labour group disagreed with the vote.
Because the guillotine's gone down, we're speeding and we assume that there's nothing. I declare the amended motion carried. Item 8.
Mayor, you still need to ask the Labour
Councillor
group.
Carmel, I must continue. Information reports to note. Special Urgency Decisions Monitoring Report. Councillor Ahern, did the Labour group wish to note report? Councillor Ahern, are you there?
Yeah, I'm having fun with the thing. Yes, we want to note it, yes.
Thank you. And Councillor Carmel, did the Conservative group wish to note report?
Noted.
Noted. I declare the amended motion carried. That's the end of tonight's meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and watching. Stay well and good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good night.